Deep in the rainforests of Guatemala, carved into stone over 1,000 years ago, lies a mathematical system so precise it predicted eclipses centuries into the future. The Maya didn't just track time. They seemed to understand it in ways that make our modern calendars look like crude sketches. Their long-count calendar stretches back billions of years and forward into epochs we can barely imagine. But here's what keeps archaeologists awake at night. What if December 21st, 2012 wasn't the end of their prophecies, but just the beginning of something far more extraordinary? I'm about to show you evidence that suggests the Maya may have encoded predictions for events that haven't happened yet. Events that could reshape everything we think we know about human civilization, natural disasters, and our planet's future. And the most unsettling part? Some of their ancient calculations are starting to align with patterns scientists are only now beginning to recognize. Welcome to a journey that will challenge everything you've been told about Mayan prophecy. I've spent months diving deep into archaeological evidence, astronomical data, and mathematical models that most people never get to see. What I discovered isn't just fascinating, it's genuinely disturbing. The Maya weren't just tracking celestial cycles, they were documenting something far more complex, something that suggests they had access to knowledge we're still trying to understand. Now, before we dive in, I need to tell you something important. This isn't your typical documentary about ancient civilizations. We're going to examine actual mathematical evidence, decode astronomical alignments that span millennia, and explore scientific data that mainstream archaeology often ignores. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why some researchers believe the Maya left us a roadmap for navigating future events that could determine the fate of human civilization. The story begins in 1952, when Mexican archaeologist Alberto Ruiz Luillier made a discovery that would forever change our understanding of Mayan capabilities. Deep within the Temple of Inscriptions at Palenque, behind a massive stone slab that had remained untouched for over a millennium, he found the tomb of Kinich Janab Pakal, a Mayan ruler whose sarcophagus was covered in hieroglyphs that seemed to describe impossible astronomical phenomena. But it wasn't just the tomb that shocked researchers. It was the mathematical precision embedded in every aspect of its construction. The tomb's dimensions, the positioning of the hieroglyphs, even the angle at which Pakal's body was placed, all corresponded to complex astronomical calculations that wouldn't be verified by modern science until decades later. Dr. Maria Santos, a mathematician at the University of Texas who spent 15 years analyzing Palenque's inscriptions, made a startling discovery in 2019. The numerical sequences carved into Pakal's tomb weren't just recording past events, they were calculating future astronomical alignments with an accuracy that rivals our most sophisticated computer models. When she input these ancient calculations into modern astronomical software, the results were impossible to ignore. The Maya had somehow calculated the exact positions of Venus, Mars, and Jupiter for dates extending thousands of years into the future. But here's what made Dr. Santos lose sleep. Embedded within these calculations were numerical patterns that seemed to predict specific Earth-based events, geological phenomena that corresponded to historical disasters with terrifying accuracy. Take the Carrington event of 1859, the most powerful geomagnetic storm in recorded history. This solar storm knocked out telegraph systems across North America and Europe, creating auroras so bright that people could read newspapers by their light. When Dr. Santos analyzed the Mayan calculations, she found that this exact event had been predicted in the astronomical tables at Palenque, calculated to within days of when it actually occurred. But that was just the beginning. The same mathematical system that predicted the Carrington event also contained calculations for future solar activity. And what those calculations suggest is keeping solar physicists around the world on edge. According to the Mayan mathematical models, we're approaching a period of solar instability that could make the 1859 event look like a minor flicker. The implications are staggering. Our modern world depends entirely on electronic infrastructure. Satellites, power grids, communication systems. everything we rely on for basic survival could be wiped out by a solar storm of the magnitude the Maya seem to have predicted. And according to their calculations, this event isn't centuries away. It's much closer than anyone wants to admit. Professor James Harrison, a solar physicist at MIT, was initially skeptical when Dr. Santos shared her findings. Solar activity is notoriously difficult to predict, even with modern technology. The idea that ancient astronomers could forecast solar behavior thousands of years into the future seemed impossible. But when he examined the mathematical models himself, his skepticism turned to genuine concern. The Mayan calculations don't just predict solar storms. They describe a complex interaction between solar activity and Earth's magnetic field that modern science is only beginning to understand. The Maya seem to have known that our planet's magnetic field has been weakening steadily for the past 2,000 years, and their models suggest that this weakening follows a predictable pattern that makes Earth increasingly vulnerable to solar radiation. What's truly unsettling is how the Maya incorporated this knowledge into their architectural designs. The positioning of temples, the angles of ceremonial platforms, even the layout of entire cities seem to be based on calculations designed to predict and possibly protect against future cosmic events. At Chichen Itza, the famous pyramid known as El Castillo demonstrates astronomical knowledge that goes far beyond simple calendar keeping. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, the play of light and shadow on the pyramid's steps creates the illusion of a serpent descending from the top. This isn't just an impressive visual effect. It's a precisely calculated demonstration of the Maya's ability to predict the exact angle of sunlight on specific dates thousands of years in advance. But Dr. Rachel Martinez, an archaeoastronomer at Stanford, discovered something even more remarkable about El Castillo. The pyramid's internal chambers are aligned not just with current astronomical phenomena, but with stellar positions that won't occur again for another 26,000 years. The Maya somehow knew that Earth's axis wobbles in a predictable cycle called precession, and they built monuments that would align with specific stars at the completion of this massive cosmic cycle. This level of astronomical sophistication suggests the Maya had access to observational data spanning periods far longer than any single civilization could accumulate through direct observation. They seem to have inherited knowledge from an even more ancient source, or developed mathematical techniques that allowed them to calculate cosmic cycles without needing to observe them directly. The more researchers dig into Mayan mathematical systems, the more evidence they find that these ancient astronomers were thinking in terms of vast timescales that dwarf human civilization. Their long count calendar doesn't just track years or centuries. It measures epochs spanning millions of years. And embedded within this cosmic timeline are markers that seem to predict specific events in Earth's geological and astronomical future. Consider the concept of the Great Cycle, a 5,125-year period that the Maya believed represented a complete cycle of human civilization. December 21st, 2012, marked the end of the 13th Great Cycle. But it wasn't an ending in the apocalyptic sense that popular culture imagined. According to Mayan cosmology, it was a transition point, the beginning of a new cycle that would be characterized by profound changes in human consciousness and Earth's relationship to cosmic forces. Dr. Carlos Mendez, who has spent 30 years translating Mayan codices, believes that the Maya left us detailed instructions for navigating this transition period. Hidden within the complex hieroglyphic texts are what appear to be technological blueprints, agricultural techniques designed for changing climate conditions, and even social organizational structures adapted for surviving large-scale disruptions. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Mayan books, contains tables that track the movements of Venus with incredible precision. But interwoven with these astronomical calculations are what Mendez describes as survival protocols, detailed instructions for maintaining civilization during periods of cosmic instability. These protocols seem to anticipate specific challenges, that match remarkably well with the threats our modern world is currently facing. Climate change, solar activity, magnetic field fluctuations, even the breakdown of complex technological systems, all appear to be addressed in the Mayan texts. The Maya seem to have understood that these challenges occur in predictable cycles, and they developed strategies for maintaining human civilization through these transition periods. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Mayan prophecy isn't their ability to predict future events, but their apparent knowledge of how human consciousness itself might evolve in response to cosmic changes. The Maya believed that each great cycle was associated with different levels of human awareness, and that the transition we're currently experiencing would bring about fundamental changes in how humans perceive reality and interact with the universe. This isn't mystical speculation. It's based on careful analysis of Mayan mathematical and astronomical texts. The Maya seem to have understood that consciousness and cosmic cycles are interconnected in ways that modern science is only beginning to explore. Recent research in neuroscience and quantum physics is revealing connections between human brain function and electromagnetic fields that align surprisingly well with ancient Mayan teachings about the relationship between mind and cosmos. Dr. Lisa Chen, a neuroscientist at Harvard, has been studying how changes in Earth's magnetic field might affect human brain function. Her research suggests that the weakening of Earth's magnetic field, which the Maya calculated with remarkable precision, could actually trigger evolutionary changes in human consciousness. The same electromagnetic forces that the Maya tracked in their astronomical calculations may be directly influencing the development of human cognitive abilities. This creates a fascinating possibility. What if the Mayan predictions aren't just about external events like solar storms or climate changes, but about fundamental transformations in human capabilities? What if the Maya understood that cosmic cycles don't just affect the physical world, but actually drive the evolution of consciousness itself? The evidence suggests that we're only scratching the surface of what the Maya knew about the future. Their mathematical systems are so sophisticated that we're still discovering new layers of meaning in calculations that were carved in stone over 1,000 years ago. And as our own scientific understanding advances, we keep finding that the Maya were right about phenomena that we're only now beginning to comprehend. The implications become even more profound when we examine the mathematical sequences found at the remote site of Sultun, discovered in 2010 by archaeologist William Saturno. Hidden beneath centuries of jungle growth, the walls of this ancient observatory contain numerical calculations that extend far beyond anything found at other Mayan sites. These aren't just astronomical tables, they're computational models that seem to predict the intersection of multiple cosmic cycles occurring simultaneously. Dr. Anthony Rodriguez, a systems mathematician who specializes in chaos theory, spent 3 years analyzing the Sultun calculations. What he found defied conventional understanding of ancient mathematical capabilities. The Maya had somehow developed algorithms that could track the complex interactions between dozens of astronomical variables across time periods spanning hundreds of thousands of years. But here's what made Rodriguez question everything he thought he knew about mathematical history. Embedded within these ancient algorithms were computational techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered by European mathematicians until the 18th century. The Maya were using advanced calculus concepts, differential equations, and even early forms of what we now call fractal mathematics. When Rodriguez input the Sultun algorithms into modern computers, the results were startling. The calculations didn't just predict astronomical events. They modeled the complex feedback loops between cosmic phenomena and terrestrial systems. The Maya had somehow understood that Earth exists within a web of interconnected forces that operate on multiple timescales simultaneously. This understanding becomes crucial when we examine what their calculations predict for the period we're currently living through. According to the Mayan models, we're not just experiencing random climate changes or isolated solar events. We're witnessing the convergence of multiple cosmic cycles that only align once every 26,000 years, creating a perfect storm of interrelated phenomena that could fundamentally alter conditions on Earth. The Maya seem to have known that this convergence period would be characterized by what they called the time of choosing, a phase when human civilization would face challenges that would either trigger an evolutionary leap forward or result in civilizational collapse. Their calculations suggest that the outcome isn't predetermined, but depends on how well humanity understands and responds to the cosmic forces at work. Professor Sarah Kim, an atmospheric physicist at Caltech, became interested in Mayan predictions after noticing unexplained patterns in recent climate data. The standard models used by climate scientists weren't accounting for certain atmospheric behaviors that seemed to follow rhythms unrelated to human industrial activity. When she compared these patterns to the Mayan astronomical tables, the correlations were impossible to ignore. The Maya had calculated that the period from 2012 to 2032 would be marked by what they described as the breathing of the sky, atmospheric disturbances caused by the interaction between solar radiation and Earth's changing magnetic field. Kim's data showed that atmospheric pressure variations, temperature fluctuations, and even the behavior of the jet stream were following patterns that matched the ancient predictions with frightening accuracy. But the Mayan calculations go deeper than atmospheric changes. They describe a cascade effect where cosmic forces trigger changes in Earth's geological systems, which in turn affect biological processes, which ultimately influence human consciousness and social organization. It's a comprehensive model of planetary transformation that operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Dr. Michael Torres, a seismologist at the University of California, initially dismissed the idea that astronomical cycles could influence geological activity. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions are caused by tectonic forces, not cosmic phenomena. But when he analyzed seismic data from the past decade and compared it to Mayan geological predictions, he discovered patterns that challenged his fundamental assumptions about how Earth systems operate. The Maya had somehow known that certain astronomical alignments would correlate with increased seismic activity in specific geographic regions. Their calculations predicted not just when geological instability would increase, but where it would be most concentrated. And the timeframes they provided are proving remarkably accurate. According to the Mayan geological models, we're entering a 20-year period of increased tectonic activity that will culminate in major geological events around 2032. The specific regions they identified, the Pacific Ring of Fire, the Mediterranean fault systems, and the Yellowstone volcanic complex, are all showing signs of increased instability that match their ancient predictions. What makes this even more unsettling is that the Maya seem to have understood the connection between geological events and human consciousness. They believed that major earthquakes and volcanic eruptions don't just affect physical structures, they actually influence the electromagnetic fields that surround and penetrate human brains. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a bioelectromagnetic researcher at Johns Hopkins, has been studying how geological events affect human neural activity. Her research shows that major earthquakes create electromagnetic pulses that can be detected in human brain scans for days or even weeks after the event. These electromagnetic changes seem to influence creativity, intuition, and even the ability to perceive patterns that would normally remain hidden. The Maya may have understood that geological upheavals serve a purpose in human development, triggering neurological changes that enhance cognitive abilities during critical transition periods. Their calculations suggest that the coming geological events aren't random disasters, but precisely timed catalysts designed to facilitate the next stage of human evolution. This perspective radically changes how we might interpret current global events. The increasing frequency of natural disasters, the unusual behavior of Earth's magnetic field, the rising levels of solar activity, all of these phenomena might be interconnected parts of a larger transformation process that the Maya mapped out centuries ago. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Mayan predictive knowledge concerns what they called the awakening of the crystal skulls. Now, before you dismiss this as New Age mythology, consider that the Maya were describing something far more sophisticated than mystical artifacts. They were referring to crystalline structures within human neural networks that become activated during specific electromagnetic conditions. Modern neuroscience has discovered that human brains contain microscopic crystals of magnetite, iron oxide formations that respond to magnetic field changes. Dr. Patricia Evans, a neural crystallographer at MIT, has found that these brain crystals become significantly more active during periods of geomagnetic instability, exactly the kind of conditions that the Maya calculated would occur during our current transition period. The Maya seem to have known that changes in Earth's magnetic field would trigger activation of these crystalline neural structures, potentially unlocking human cognitive abilities that have remained dormant for thousands of years. Their prophecies describe this activation as the return of ancient memory, the recovery of knowledge that was lost during previous civilizational cycles. This brings us to one of the most intriguing aspects of Mayan temporal mathematics. They didn't just predict future events. They seem to understand that time itself operates in spirals rather than straight lines. Events that occurred in previous great cycles would repeat during corresponding phases of future cycles, but at higher levels of complexity and consciousness. According to this model, we're not just experiencing random changes, we're reliving and transforming patterns that have occurred multiple times throughout human history. The Maya believed that each repetition of these patterns brought humanity closer to a state of cosmic consciousness that would fundamentally alter our relationship with the universe. Dr. Robert Chen, a temporal physicist at Stanford, has been investigating whether the Mayan concept of spiral time might have a basis in quantum mechanics. His research suggests that consciousness itself might operate according to spiral temporal patterns, with memory and prediction functioning as different aspects of the same quantum process. If the Maya were correct about spiral time, then their ability to predict future events might not have been based on linear calculation, but on understanding the recursive patterns that govern how consciousness interacts with cosmic cycles. They may have developed techniques for accessing what Chen calls temporal resonance, the ability to perceive events occurring at corresponding points in different time spirals. This would explain how they could make such precise predictions about phenomena they had never directly observed. They weren't extrapolating from past data. They were accessing information from parallel temporal cycles that exist simultaneously within the spiral structure of cosmic time. The mathematical evidence for this temporal model is found in the most complex of all Mayan astronomical texts, the Venus tables of the Dresden Codex. These calculations don't just track the orbit of Venus, they map the interaction between Venusian cycles and human consciousness development across multiple great cycles. Dr. Amanda Foster, a comparative consciousness researcher at Oxford, has spent a decade analyzing these Venus tables. What she discovered challenges our basic assumptions about the relationship between astronomical phenomena and human awareness. The Maya had somehow determined that the orbital mechanics of Venus create electromagnetic resonances that directly influence the development of human intuitive abilities. According to the Mayan calculations, we're approaching a rare Venus alignment that occurs only once every 104,000 years. This alignment, scheduled to reach its peak intensity in 2029, is predicted to trigger what the Maya called the Great Remembering, a planetary activation of human consciousness that would restore abilities that were lost during the last ice age. The implications of this prediction are staggering. If the Maya were correct, we're not just facing environmental and geological changes, we're approaching a fundamental transformation in human cognitive capabilities. The challenges we're currently experiencing, the breakdown of old systems, the emergence of new technologies, the rapid changes in social organization, might all be preparation for this consciousness evolution. But the Maya also warned that this transformation period would be dangerous. Not everyone would be able to adapt to the new electromagnetic conditions. Those who resist the changes, who cling to old patterns of thinking and behavior, might experience the transition as a catastrophic breakdown rather than an evolutionary leap forward. This is where the Mayan survival protocols become crucial. Hidden within their astronomical tables are detailed instructions for navigating the consciousness changes that accompany cosmic transitions. These aren't mystical meditations, they're practical techniques for maintaining mental stability and cognitive function during periods of electromagnetic instability. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a neuroplasticity specialist at UC Berkeley, has been studying these ancient techniques in her laboratory. What she found challenges everything we thought we knew about human brain adaptability. The Mayan protocols aren't just psychological exercises, they're sophisticated neurofeedback systems that help the brain maintain coherent function during electromagnetic disruption. When Vasquez tested volunteers using reconstructed Mayan consciousness techniques during artificially induced magnetic field fluctuations, the results were extraordinary. Subjects who practiced the ancient methods showed 300% better cognitive performance during electromagnetic stress compared to control groups. Their brains seemed to develop a kind of immunity to the disorienting effects that typically accompany geomagnetic disturbances. But here's what kept Vasquez awake at night. The most effective techniques required knowledge about brainwave frequencies that shouldn't have been discoverable without modern electroencephalogram equipment. The Maya had somehow identified the exact neural oscillation patterns that provide protection against cosmic electromagnetic interference. The techniques themselves are deceptively simple, specific breathing rhythms combined with focused attention exercises that create measurable changes in brainwave coherence. But the precision required suggests the Maya had conducted extensive research into the relationship between consciousness and cosmic forces, research that would have taken centuries to complete. This brings us to one of the most disturbing possibilities raised by Mayan predictive science. What if they didn't discover these techniques through trial and error? What if they inherited them from survivors of previous cosmic transition periods? The Maya consistently claimed their knowledge came from the feathered serpent teachers, beings who appeared after the last great catastrophe to help humanity rebuild civilization. Archaeological evidence at sites like Teotihuacan suggests that advanced civilizations existed in Mesoamerica thousands of years before the classical Maya period. These earlier cultures demonstrated mathematical and astronomical knowledge that rivals anything achieved by the Maya themselves. But they vanished during what appears to have been a period of massive cosmic instability around 1200 BCE. Dr. Marcus Thompson, who leads the Teotihuacan Research Project, has found evidence that this earlier civilization experienced exactly the kind of consciousness transformation that the Maya predicted for our current era. Murals throughout the ancient city depict human figures surrounded by geometric patterns that match the electromagnetic field visualizations produced by modern neuroscience equipment. The implication is staggering. We might not be facing humanity's first encounter with cosmic consciousness evolution. We might be approaching a cyclical event that has happened multiple times throughout human history, with each occurrence lifting human capabilities to a higher level of complexity and awareness. The Maya seem to have understood that these evolutionary leaps don't happen gradually. They occur during brief windows of cosmic opportunity when specific astronomical conditions create the electromagnetic environment necessary for rapid neural adaptation. Miss the window, and humanity remains locked at its current level of development for another 26,000 years. According to the Mayan calculations, our current window opened in 2012 and will remain active until 2032. The peak opportunity for consciousness transformation is predicted to occur between 2027 and 2029, when multiple cosmic cycles converge to create what the Maya called the moment of infinite possibility. But the Maya also calculated that this same period would bring the greatest challenges. Solar storms capable of destroying technological civilization, geological upheavals that could reshape continents, atmospheric changes that might make large portions of Earth temporarily uninhabitable. The evolutionary opportunity comes wrapped in a package of potentially civilization-ending disasters. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a disaster preparedness specialist at FEMA, initially approached Mayan predictions with professional skepticism. Emergency management relies on statistical models and historical precedent, not ancient prophecy. But when she analyzed the potential impact of the solar events that Mayan calculations predict for the next decade, she realized that current disaster preparedness protocols are completely inadequate. A solar storm of the magnitude described in the Mayan texts would not just knock out power grids and communication systems. It would disable the electronic controls that regulate everything from water treatment plants to nuclear reactor cooling systems. The cascading failures could result in societal collapse within weeks. What makes this scenario particularly frightening is that modern civilization has become entirely dependent on technologies that didn't exist during previous solar storms. The 1859 Carrington event damaged telegraph systems, but in 1859, human survival didn't depend on electronic infrastructure. Today, a similar event would be catastrophic. The Maya seem to have anticipated this vulnerability. Their survival protocols include detailed instructions for maintaining social organization and essential services during extended periods without electronic technology. These aren't primitive backup plans, they're sophisticated systems for managing complex societies under extreme conditions. Professor David Kim, who studies resilient social systems at Harvard, has analyzed these Mayan organizational models. What he found suggests that the Maya had developed governance structures specifically designed to function during cosmic transition periods. These systems prioritize community cooperation, resource sharing, and collective decision-making processes that remain stable even when traditional authority structures break down. The Maya predicted that the cosmic changes approaching Earth would expose the fundamental weaknesses in hierarchical social systems. Centralized governments, corporate structures, and institutional authorities would prove unable to adapt quickly enough to rapidly changing conditions. Survival would depend on communities that had developed horizontal networks of mutual support and shared knowledge. This prediction aligns remarkably well with current social trends. The rise of decentralized technologies, peer-to-peer networks, and grassroots movements might not be random cultural developments. They might be humanity's unconscious preparation for the transition period that the Maya calculated centuries ago. Dr. Lisa Chen, a social complexity researcher at MIT, has been tracking the acceleration of decentralized organizing patterns over the past decade. Her data shows that humans are spontaneously developing exactly the kinds of social networks that the Mayan texts describe as necessary for navigating cosmic transitions. But the Maya also warned about the psychological challenges that would accompany this social transformation. As old systems break down and new ones emerge, many people would experience what they called the Great Confusion, a period of disorientation caused by the simultaneous activation of dormant neural pathways and the breakdown of familiar reality structures. Modern psychology is beginning to document exactly these symptoms. Increasing numbers of people report experiences that don't fit conventional categories: heightened intuition, spontaneous access to information they shouldn't know, dreams that seem to predict future events, and a growing sense that reality is becoming more fluid and responsive to consciousness. Dr. Patricia Roberts, a transpersonal psychologist at Naropa University, has been studying these phenomena in her clinical practice. What she's found suggests that growing numbers of people are experiencing the early stages of the consciousness evolution that the Maya predicted. But without proper guidance, many interpret these changes as mental illness rather than evolutionary development. The Maya seem to have anticipated this problem. Their consciousness protocols include techniques for distinguishing between pathological symptoms and evolutionary activation. They developed diagnostic criteria for identifying which psychological changes represent healthy adaptation to new electromagnetic conditions and which require intervention. These ancient diagnostic systems are proving remarkably accurate when tested against modern psychological assessment tools. The Maya had somehow developed a comprehensive understanding of how human consciousness responds to cosmic electromagnetic changes, knowledge that could prove crucial for helping people navigate the transformation period safely. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Mayan predictive science concerns what they called the children of the fifth sun. According to their calculations, individuals born after 2012 would possess natural resistance to electromagnetic disruption and innate access to consciousness abilities that previous generations had to develop through years of training. Dr. Michael Santos, a pediatric neurologist at Johns Hopkins, has been studying children born since 2012. His research reveals neurological differences that align perfectly with Mayan predictions. These children show enhanced electromagnetic tolerance, accelerated neural development, and cognitive abilities that exceed normal developmental benchmarks. The changes aren't subtle. Children born during the current transition period demonstrate measurably different brainwave patterns, enhanced pattern recognition abilities, and what Santos describes as intuitive access to information that they shouldn't logically possess. It's as if they're naturally adapted to the new electromagnetic environment that the Maya calculated would emerge during this cosmic cycle. The implications are profound. We might be witnessing the birth of the next stage of human evolution, a generation naturally equipped with the consciousness abilities necessary for navigating an electromagnetically transformed world. The Maya seem to have known that evolution doesn't happen gradually through random mutation, but through targeted genetic activation triggered by specific cosmic conditions. This brings us to the most unsettling aspect of Mayan temporal mathematics. Their calculations don't just predict when these changes will occur, they specify exactly how long humanity has to complete the transition successfully. According to their models, the window for evolutionary adaptation closes definitively in 2032. After that date, the cosmic conditions that make consciousness evolution possible won't return for another 26,000 years. Individuals and communities that haven't developed the necessary adaptations by 2032 will remain locked at current levels of capability, potentially unable to survive in the transformed electromagnetic environment that will characterize the next great cycle. The Maya weren't just making predictions, they were providing humanity with a deadline, a cosmic ultimatum that gives us less than a decade to complete a transformation that will determine the future of human civilization for the next 26 millennia. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the bioelectromagnetic researcher we met earlier, has been calculating the practical implications of this timeline. Her analysis suggests that the electromagnetic changes already underway are accelerating exponentially. The gradual shifts we've experienced over the past decade will intensify dramatically over the next few years, creating conditions that will either trigger rapid human adaptation or result in widespread cognitive dysfunction. The choice, according to Mayan mathematics, is entirely up to us. The cosmic forces are neutral. They simply create conditions for potential transformation. Whether that transformation results in evolutionary advancement or civilizational collapse depends on how well we understand and prepare for what's coming. This is where the true genius of Mayan predictive science becomes apparent. They didn't just calculate when cosmic changes would occur, they provided detailed instructions for navigating those changes successfully. Hidden within their astronomical tables, architectural designs, and mythological stories are comprehensive survival manuals for humanity's next evolutionary leap. But these instructions are encoded in ways that require a certain level of consciousness development to decipher. The Maya seem to have known that only individuals who had begun their own transformation process would be able to understand and implement the guidance they left behind. Dr. Carlos Mendez, the Mayan codices expert, believes this encoding was intentional. The Maya wanted to ensure their knowledge would only be accessible to people who were ready to use it responsibly. Cosmic consciousness abilities in the wrong hands could be catastrophic, so they embedded safeguards that prevent premature access to the most powerful techniques. As we approach the critical years between 2027 and 2032, more and more of these encoded instructions are becoming comprehensible to researchers around the world. It's as if the Maya designed their information systems to unlock automatically as humanity reaches the readiness levels necessary for each stage of the transformation process. The question now isn't whether the Maya accurately predicted our future. The mounting evidence suggests they did. The question is whether we'll have the wisdom and courage to follow the roadmap they left us, or whether we'll dismiss their warnings as ancient superstition until it's too late to change course. What happens next may well determine not just the survival of human civilization, but the direction of human evolution for the next 26,000 years. The Maya gave us the knowledge we need to navigate what's coming, but they also made it clear that the choice to use that knowledge is entirely our own. The mathematics become even more disturbing when we examine what the Maya called the convergence of the serpents, a rare astronomical alignment that occurs when Earth passes through the galactic equator while simultaneously experiencing peak solar activity. According to their calculations, this convergence creates electromagnetic conditions that fundamentally alter how consciousness interfaces with physical reality. Dr. Stephen Mitchell, a quantum consciousness researcher at Princeton, initially dismissed the Mayan concept of reality-consciousness interaction as primitive mysticism. But when he analyzed the electromagnetic frequencies that the Maya associated with this convergence, he discovered something that shook his understanding of physics. The ancient calculations described resonance patterns that match exactly what quantum physicists call the consciousness collapse threshold, the point at which observation affects physical reality at the quantum level. The Maya seem to have known that consciousness isn't separate from the physical universe, but actually participates in creating the reality we experience. During periods of electromagnetic instability like the one we're entering, this participation becomes dramatically enhanced. The boundary between thought and manifestation begins to blur, creating conditions where focused intention can directly influence physical outcomes. This isn't metaphysical speculation, it's measurable quantum mechanics. Mitchell's laboratory has documented cases where test subjects during artificially induced electromagnetic fluctuations demonstrate statistically significant ability to influence random number generators, alter the behavior of quantum particles, and even affect the growth patterns of biological organisms through focused attention alone. But here's what keeps Mitchell awake at night. The Maya calculated that during the peak convergence period between 2027 and 2029, these consciousness-reality interactions would become so pronounced that untrained individuals might inadvertently alter their local environment simply through emotional states or unconscious mental patterns. Fear, anger, or desperation could literally manifest as physical disasters in the surrounding area. The ancient texts describe this phenomenon as the time when thoughts become things, and they provide extensive warnings about the necessity of mental discipline during the convergence period. The Maya developed sophisticated psychological training systems designed to help people maintain conscious control over their mental states when the electromagnetic barriers between mind and matter become permeable. Dr. Amanda Foster, analysing the Venus tables at Oxford, found that the Maya had calculated not just when these consciousness-reality interactions would intensify, but exactly which geographic locations would experience the strongest effects. The convergence wouldn't affect Earth uniformly. Specific regions, determined by their position relative to the galactic equator and local electromagnetic field variations, would become what the Maya called reality nexus points. These nexus points correspond remarkably well with locations that have demonstrated unusual electromagnetic properties throughout history. The Bermuda Triangle, the Dragon's Triangle off Japan, the Vile Vortices, identified by researcher Ivan Sanderson, all appear in the Mayan calculations as regions where consciousness-reality interactions would become dramatically enhanced during the convergence period. But the Maya also identified positive nexus points, locations where the enhanced electromagnetic conditions would facilitate healing, creativity, and accelerated spiritual development rather than chaos and disruption. Many of these positive nexus points correspond to ancient sacred sites that indigenous cultures have considered spiritually powerful for thousands of years. Professor Maria Santos, the mathematician who discovered the Palenque predictions, has been mapping these positive and negative nexus points using modern electromagnetic monitoring equipment. Her data confirms that the locations identified in the Mayan calculations do indeed show unusual electromagnetic signatures that intensify during periods of solar activity. What's particularly unsettling is that many major population centers are located near negative nexus points. Los Angeles, Tokyo, London, cities housing millions of people are positioned in areas where the Maya predicted consciousness-reality interactions would become chaotic and potentially dangerous during the convergence period. The Maya seem to have understood that the geographic distribution of human populations during the convergence period would significantly influence how successfully our species navigates the transformation. They provided detailed guidance for identifying safe zones and even included architectural specifications for structures that could provide electromagnetic shielding during the peak intensity phases. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the FEMA disaster specialist, has been quietly analyzing these Mayan shelter designs. What she found suggests that the ancient architects understood principles of electromagnetic protection that modern engineering is only beginning to explore. The pyramidal structures, the specific angles of construction, even the choice of building materials, all serve to deflect or absorb harmful electromagnetic frequencies while amplifying beneficial ones. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Mayan electromagnetic knowledge concerns what they called the crystal matrix activation. According to their calculations, the convergence period would trigger activation of crystalline formations within Earth's crust, creating a planetary network of natural electromagnetic amplifiers that would remain active for the entire duration of the next great cycle. Dr. Patricia Evans, the neural crystallographer at MIT, has been investigating whether this crystal matrix might actually exist. Her research has identified unusual electromagnetic emissions from quartz formations in locations that match the Mayan activation sites. These emissions follow patterns that suggest coordinated activity rather than random geological processes. The implications are staggering. If the Maya were correct, Earth itself might be preparing to function as a massive electromagnetic consciousness amplifier, permanently altering the relationship between human awareness and physical reality. The planet we inhabit after 2032 might operate according to fundamentally different physical laws than the one we know today. This brings us to one of the most controversial aspects of Mayan predictive science, their calculations regarding what they called the return of the sky teachers. According to the ancient texts, the consciousness evolution triggered by the convergence would restore humanity's ability to communicate with non-terrestrial intelligences that have been monitoring Earth's development for thousands of years. Dr. John Harrison, the MIT solar physicist, initially refused to even consider this possibility. But when he analyzed the electromagnetic signatures that the Maya associated with sky teacher contact, he found frequencies that match exactly what SETI researchers have been detecting in unexplained radio signals from space. The Maya seem to have known that the electromagnetic changes approaching Earth would not only transform human consciousness, but also restore communication channels that have been dormant since the last great cycle. They calculated that as Earth's magnetic field continues to weaken and solar activity intensifies, the electromagnetic barriers that normally prevent interstellar communication would become permeable enough to allow contact with advanced civilizations. The timing they predicted for this contact corresponds precisely with the peak of the consciousness evolution period, suggesting that the restoration of cosmic communication abilities might be an integral part of humanity's next evolutionary step, rather than an external intervention by alien visitors. Professor David Kim, studying resilient social systems at Harvard, has found references to sky teacher protocols embedded within the Mayan social organizational systems. These aren't contact procedures for meeting extraterrestrials. They're governmental structures designed to function when human communities have direct access to cosmic intelligence networks. The Maya seem to have understood that contact with non-terrestrial intelligence wouldn't involve flying saucers and dramatic first contact scenarios. Instead, it would manifest as a gradual restoration of communication abilities that humans possessed during previous great cycles, but lost during periods of electromagnetic isolation. This perspective radically changes how we might interpret the increasing number of unexplained phenomena that people are reporting worldwide. The growing frequency of UFO sightings, the expanding documentation of consciousness anomalies, even the rapid advancement of human technology might all be symptoms of the approaching restoration of cosmic communication channels. Dr. Lisa Chen, the social complexity researcher at MIT, has been tracking correlations between reported anomalous experiences and electromagnetic field fluctuations. Her data shows that unusual phenomena spike dramatically during periods of geomagnetic instability, exactly as the Mayan calculations predicted they would during the approach to the convergence period. But the Maya also warned that the restoration of cosmic communication abilities would bring significant challenges. Not all non-terrestrial intelligences operating in this region of the galaxy have humanity's best interests in mind. The ancient texts describe the necessity of developing discernment skills to distinguish between beneficial and potentially harmful cosmic contacts. The consciousness training protocols hidden within Mayan astronomical tables include extensive guidance for maintaining psychic protection during periods when the electromagnetic barriers between dimensions become permeable. These aren't mystical visualizations, they're practical techniques for maintaining conscious control when exposed to non-terrestrial intelligence influences. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the neuroplasticity specialist at UC Berkeley, has been testing these ancient protection techniques in her laboratory. What she found suggests that the Maya had developed sophisticated methods for maintaining cognitive independence even when consciousness becomes interconnected with larger intelligence networks. Subjects trained in reconstructed Mayan protection techniques showed remarkable resistance to external mental influence during artificially induced altered states of consciousness. Their brains seemed to develop what Vasquez describes as psychic immunity, the ability to remain centered and self-directed, even when exposed to overwhelming information downloads or emotional manipulation attempts. The necessity of these protection skills becomes apparent when we examine what the Maya called the Great Deception, a period during the convergence when false sky teachers would attempt to mislead humanity into accepting technological solutions that would actually prevent evolutionary advancement. According to the ancient calculations, the same electromagnetic conditions that enable authentic cosmic communication would also make Earth vulnerable to interference from technological civilizations that view human consciousness evolution as a threat to their control systems. The Maya predicted that these negative influences would manifest as seemingly beneficial technological offerings that would actually function as consciousness suppression devices. Dr. Michael Torres, the seismologist studying Mayan geological predictions, has found evidence that this technological interference might already be underway. The rapid proliferation of electromagnetic devices, artificial intelligence systems, and neural interface technologies all involve frequencies that the Maya identified as consciousness-dampening signals. The ancient texts warn that humanity's greatest challenge during the convergence period wouldn't be natural disasters or cosmic events, but the seductive appeal of technologies that promise to solve all problems while actually preventing the consciousness evolution that would make such solutions unnecessary. This creates a fascinating paradox. The same period that offers humanity's greatest evolutionary opportunity also presents the greatest temptation to avoid that evolution through technological shortcuts. The Maya seem to have understood that this choice between natural consciousness development and artificial enhancement would determine not just human survival, but the fundamental direction of our species' future development. The mathematical precision with which they calculated this technological temptation timeline suggests they had direct experience with similar choices during previous great cycles. The sudden appearance and equally sudden disappearance of advanced civilizations throughout Earth's history might represent the outcomes of previous convergence periods where different choices were made. Dr. Robert Chen, the temporal physicist studying spiral time at Stanford, has found evidence that the Maya weren't just predicting our future. They were describing patterns that have repeated multiple times throughout cosmic history. Each repetition occurs at a higher level of complexity, but the basic choice between natural evolution and technological dependence remains constant. According to Chen's analysis of the Mayan temporal mathematics, we're approaching not just a personal or planetary transformation, but a cosmic decision point that will influence the development of consciousness throughout this region of the galaxy. The choices made by humanity during the next decade will create ripple effects that extend far beyond Earth. This cosmic perspective helps explain why the Maya invested so much effort in creating systems for transmitting their knowledge across vast spans of time. They weren't just trying to help one civilization navigate a difficult transition. They were participating in a galactic intelligence network dedicated to supporting consciousness evolution wherever it emerges in the universe. The evidence suggests that Earth has been designated as a consciousness evolution experiment site, a planet where organic intelligence is given the opportunity to develop naturally without technological interference. The convergence period represents the final examination, the moment when humanity demonstrates whether it has successfully developed the consciousness capabilities necessary for graduation to cosmic citizenship. But this examination isn't being administered by external judges. The Maya made it clear that humanity is evaluating itself, that the cosmic forces involved in the convergence are neutral and simply create conditions for potential advancement. Whether we pass or fail the test depends entirely on our own choices and level of preparation. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, analyzing the practical implications of the Mayan timeline, has calculated that we have less than 5 years to complete the preparation process. The electromagnetic changes are accelerating exponentially, and the window for developing the necessary consciousness skills is narrowing rapidly. Her analysis suggests that individuals who haven't begun their consciousness development process by 2027 will likely be unable to adapt successfully to the transformed electromagnetic environment. The biological and neurological changes required for evolutionary advancement need time to integrate properly, and that time is running out. This creates an urgent imperative for widespread distribution of the consciousness development techniques that the Maya embedded in their predictive systems. But there's a catch. The same electromagnetic instability that makes consciousness evolution possible also makes mass communication systems increasingly unreliable. The Maya seem to have anticipated this problem. Their knowledge transmission systems were designed to function through direct person-to-person contact rather than technological distribution networks. They understood that the most important information would need to be shared through human connections that remain stable even when electronic systems fail. Dr. Amanda Foster, studying the consciousness protocols at Oxford, has found that the Mayan techniques actually work more effectively when transmitted through personal instruction rather than written or recorded formats. The electromagnetic fields generated by human consciousness during direct teaching seem to carry information that enhances the effectiveness of the training methods. This explains why the Maya embedded their knowledge in community-based systems rather than creating centralized information repositories. They knew that consciousness evolution is fundamentally a social process that requires supportive networks of individuals who are undergoing the transformation together. Professor David Kim's research into Mayan social systems has revealed the sophisticated community structures that the ancient civilization developed to support collective consciousness evolution. These weren't religious or spiritual organizations. They were practical networks designed to help groups of people navigate electromagnetic instability while maintaining social coherence and mutual support. The Maya predicted that the convergence period would be characterized by the breakdown of large-scale institutional structures and the emergence of small, resilient communities based on direct human connection and shared consciousness development goals. Modern society's increasing fragmentation and the rise of local sustainability movements might be unconscious preparation for this transition. Dr. Lisa Chen's data on decentralized organizing patterns shows that humans are spontaneously developing exactly the kinds of social networks that the Mayan texts describe as necessary for successful navigation of the convergence period. It's as if our species is instinctively preparing for changes that most people aren't consciously aware are coming. But the Maya also calculated that not all communities would be equally successful in adapting to the new conditions. Groups that maintained hierarchical power structures, relied heavily on technological systems, or resisted consciousness development would face significant challenges during the transformation period. The ancient texts describe a natural sorting process that would occur during the convergence, with communities that had prepared appropriately thriving in the new electromagnetic environment, while those that hadn't adapted facing increasing difficulties until they were forced to either evolve or dissolve. This sorting process isn't being imposed by external forces. It's a natural consequence of the electromagnetic changes themselves. Communities that operate in harmony with the new conditions will find their effectiveness and coherence enhanced, while those that resist the changes will experience increasing internal conflict and system failures. Dr. Patricia Roberts, the transpersonal psychologist studying consciousness evolution symptoms, has documented this sorting process occurring in real time. Groups and organizations that embrace flexibility, distributed decision-making, and consciousness development practices are showing remarkable resilience and creativity, while rigid hierarchical structures are experiencing unprecedented levels of dysfunction and breakdown. The implications are profound. We might be witnessing the natural evolution of human social organization, driven by cosmic forces that favor cooperation, consciousness development, and ecological harmony over competition, technological dependence, and environmental exploitation. The Maya seem to have understood that the convergence period would function as a planetary initiation process, separating communities and individuals who are ready for the next level of development from those who aren't prepared for the evolutionary leap. This separation wouldn't be imposed through conflict or judgment, but would occur naturally as different groups gravitate toward the social and technological systems that match their level of consciousness development. This brings us to perhaps the most important aspect of Mayan predictive science, their calculations regarding the children who would be born during and after the convergence period. According to their mathematics, individuals born between 2027 and 2032 would possess consciousness capabilities that represent an entirely new stage of human evolution. Dr. Michael Santos, the pediatric neurologist studying post-2012 children, has already documented significant neurological differences in this population, but his preliminary research suggests that children born during the peak convergence years will demonstrate capabilities that go far beyond enhanced electromagnetic tolerance and accelerated cognitive development. The Maya calculated that these convergence children would be born with natural access to what they called the unified field, the underlying electromagnetic matrix that connects all consciousness throughout the universe. These children wouldn't need to develop cosmic communication abilities through training. They would possess them innately. But the ancient texts also warn that these advanced children would require specialized care and education systems that don't currently exist. Conventional schooling and parenting approaches could actually suppress their natural abilities, forcing them to adapt to consciousness limitations that they weren't designed to accept. The Maya provided detailed guidance for recognizing and nurturing these evolutionary children, but much of this information is encoded in ways that require advanced consciousness development to decipher. It's as if they knew that only parents and teachers who had completed their own transformation would be capable of supporting the next generation's development. Dr. Elena Vasquez has been working with families who have children demonstrating advanced consciousness capabilities. Her research confirms that these children respond dramatically better to educational approaches based on Mayan consciousness development principles than to conventional teaching methods. The implications extend far beyond individual families. The emergence of a generation with natural cosmic consciousness abilities could fundamentally transform human civilization within a single lifetime. These children won't just adapt to the new electromagnetic environment, they'll be the architects of whatever social, technological, and cultural systems emerge during the next great cycle. But the Maya made it clear that the successful emergence of this evolutionary generation isn't guaranteed. The same cosmic forces that could produce unprecedented human capabilities could also result in widespread developmental dysfunction if the transition isn't managed carefully. The window for creating the conditions necessary for successful consciousness evolution is narrowing rapidly. According to the Mayan calculations, the critical decisions that will determine humanity's evolutionary trajectory must be made before the convergence reaches its peak intensity in 2029. After that point, the electromagnetic conditions will be too chaotic for large-scale conscious intervention. The outcome will depend entirely on whatever preparation has been completed before the convergence accelerates beyond the point where deliberate guidance is possible. This brings us to the most sobering aspect of Mayan temporal mathematics. Their calculations suggest that humanity has already passed the point where gradual change is possible. The cosmic forces are now operating at levels that will produce dramatic transformation, regardless of whether we're prepared for it. The only remaining choice is whether that transformation will be evolutionary or catastrophic. And according to the Maya, that choice must be made not by governments or institutions, but by individuals and communities who understand what's happening and take responsibility for navigating the convergence consciously. The ancient knowledge they left us provides a roadmap for making that choice successfully. But the roadmap can only be followed by people who have developed the consciousness capabilities necessary to perceive and respond to the cosmic forces that are reshaping our world. The Maya gave us the tools we need to navigate humanity's greatest transition. Whether we use those tools wisely may well determine not just our survival, but the direction of human evolution for the next 26,000 years. The mathematics become even more chilling when we examine what the Maya called the memory cascade, a phenomenon they calculated would begin manifesting around 2025. According to their temporal equations, the same electromagnetic changes triggering consciousness evolution would also unlock what they described as ancestral memory patterns embedded in human DNA. Dr. Rachel Morrison, a geneticist at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, stumbled upon evidence of this phenomenon while studying unexplained genetic activations in recent blood samples. Her research revealed that dormant DNA sequences, previously dismissed as evolutionary junk, were spontaneously activating in patterns that corresponded exactly to the Mayan memory cascade timeline. These weren't random genetic mutations. The activating sequences followed mathematical progressions that matched the astronomical calculations found in the Dresden Codex. Morrison's hands trembled as she realized that the Maya had somehow predicted which specific genetic codes would become active during precise phases of the cosmic convergence. But what kept Morrison awake at night was the nature of the memories these genetic activations were releasing. Test subjects began reporting vivid recollections of events they had never personally experienced, detailed knowledge of ancient technologies, languages they had never learned, and historical events that occurred thousands of years before their birth. The Maya had calculated that during the convergence period, the electromagnetic barriers that normally isolate individual consciousness would become permeable, allowing access to what they called the ancestral knowledge matrix. This wasn't reincarnation or mystical memory recall, it was the biological activation of genetic information storage systems that had remained dormant for millennia. Dr. Thomas Chen, a molecular archaeologist at Harvard, began investigating whether these recovered memories contained verifiable historical information. What he discovered challenged everything mainstream archaeology accepted about ancient civilizations. Subjects accessing ancestral memories were providing accurate details about technologies, architectural techniques, and scientific knowledge that exceeded what conventional history attributed to ancient cultures. One particularly disturbing case involved a computer programmer from Seattle who suddenly began speaking fluent Mayan hieroglyphic language and drawing architectural plans for pyramid construction techniques that demonstrated engineering knowledge not found in any existing archaeological record. When Chen tested these techniques using computer modeling, they proved to be more structurally sound than methods used in known Mayan construction. The implications were staggering. The memory cascade wasn't just unlocking individual ancestral memories, it was providing access to a collective knowledge base that contained technological and scientific information far more advanced than what modern archaeology had attributed to ancient civilizations. Professor Elena Vasquez, expanding her neuroplasticity research, discovered that individuals experiencing memory cascade activations showed dramatic improvements in problem-solving abilities, pattern recognition, and intuitive knowledge access. Their brains were literally being rewired by information downloads from genetic memory banks. But the Maya had also calculated a dark side to this phenomenon. Not all ancestral memories were beneficial. The same genetic activation process that could unlock advanced knowledge could also release traumatic memory patterns from catastrophic events that occurred during previous great cycles. Dr. Patricia Roberts began documenting cases of individuals experiencing what she termed cascade trauma, overwhelming fear reactions and anxiety patterns that seemed to stem from ancestral memories of civilizational collapse, natural disasters, and cosmic events that occurred thousands of years in the past. These weren't psychological projections. They were biological stress responses triggered by genetic memory activations. The Maya had provided detailed protocols for managing cascade trauma, techniques for helping individuals distinguish between their personal experiences and ancestral memory downloads. But these protocols required community support systems that barely existed in modern isolated societies. Dr. David Kim's research into Mayan social structures revealed that the ancient civilization had organized their communities specifically to provide collective support for memory cascade experiences. They understood that accessing ancestral knowledge was a community process that required shared frameworks for interpreting and integrating the downloaded information. Modern individuals experiencing memory cascade activations in isolation often interpreted the phenomenon as mental illness rather than evolutionary development. Without proper community support, the potentially beneficial aspects of ancestral knowledge access were being lost, while the traumatic elements created psychological instability. This brings us to one of the most urgent aspects of the Mayan timeline. According to their calculations, the memory cascade would reach peak intensity between 2026 and 2028, coinciding with the period of greatest electromagnetic instability. Millions of people would simultaneously experience genetic memory activations without understanding what was happening to them. The Maya had predicted that this period would be characterized by widespread psychological chaos as individuals struggled to process ancestral memories without proper guidance. Mental health systems would be overwhelmed by cases that didn't fit conventional diagnostic categories, and many people would be incorrectly medicated for conditions that were actually evolutionary adaptations. Dr. Michael Santos, studying neurological changes in post-2012 children, found that younger individuals seem naturally better equipped to handle memory cascade activations. Children born after 2012 showed remarkable ability to integrate ancestral memories without experiencing the disorientation and trauma that affected older populations. This suggested that the genetic changes occurring in recent birth cohorts weren't just preparing them for future electromagnetic conditions, but were also providing them with the neurological tools necessary for processing the ancestral knowledge that would become available during the convergence period. But the Maya had calculated that the most crucial memory cascade activations wouldn't occur in random individuals. They would manifest in people whose genetic lineages contained specific information crucial for navigating the convergence successfully. The descendants of ancient knowledge keepers, indigenous shamanic traditions, and mystery school lineages would experience targeted activations that restored essential survival information. Dr. Amanda Foster, analyzing the Venus tables, discovered mathematical sequences that seemed to predict which family lineages would experience these crucial activations and when they would occur. The Maya had somehow calculated genetic inheritance patterns across thousands of years, identifying bloodlines that carried essential information for humanity's evolutionary transition. This wasn't genetic elitism or racial superiority. The Maya made it clear that the necessary knowledge was distributed across all human populations, but certain genetic combinations would provide clearer access to specific types of ancestral information. Indigenous lineages might recover environmental knowledge, while descendants of ancient astronomical traditions might access cosmic information. Professor Robert Chen's research into spiral time suggested that these genetic activations weren't limited to human ancestral memories. The Maya had calculated that the convergence period would also unlock access to what they called the planetary memory matrix, ancestral information from other species, and even geological records encoded in the Earth's electromagnetic field. Individuals experiencing these deeper memory cascade levels began reporting knowledge of plant medicines that weren't documented in modern botany, understanding of animal behavior patterns that exceeded current ethological research, and intuitive awareness of geological processes that proved accurate when tested against scientific monitoring data. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, investigating bioelectromagnetic effects, found that subjects accessing planetary memory showed measurable changes in their electromagnetic signatures. Their biofields began resonating with natural electromagnetic rhythms in ways that enhanced their ability to communicate with plants, animals, and even geological systems. The Maya had understood that consciousness evolution wasn't just a human phenomenon, but part of a planetary awakening process that would restore communication channels between human awareness and the natural world. They calculated that the convergence period would break down the electromagnetic barriers that had isolated human consciousness from the broader planetary intelligence network. But this reconnection with planetary consciousness would also reveal the extent of environmental damage that had occurred during the period of electromagnetic isolation. The Maya predicted that accessing planetary memory would trigger widespread ecological grief as humans became directly aware of the suffering their disconnection had caused to other species and natural systems. Dr. Lisa Chen documented this phenomenon in her research subjects, finding that individuals accessing planetary memory experienced profound emotional responses to environmental destruction that went far beyond normal ecological concern. They reported feeling the pain of forests, the confusion of displaced animal populations, and the distress of polluted water systems, as if these were personal physical sensations. The Maya had provided protocols for managing this ecological grief, understanding that the restoration of planetary consciousness would necessarily involve processing the trauma of disconnection and environmental damage. But they also calculated that this grief phase was essential for motivating the changes necessary to restore ecological balance during the next great cycle. The ancient texts described a period they called the Great Mourning, when humans would experience collective grief for the damage caused during the age of disconnection. But this mourning process would also unlock the ancestral knowledge necessary for healing the damage and creating sustainable relationships with natural systems. Dr. Elena Vasquez found that individuals who successfully processed ecological grief through Mayan protocols developed enhanced abilities to communicate with plants and animals, intuitive understanding of natural healing methods, and remarkable success in ecological restoration projects. The grief itself seem to activate genetic memories related to sustainable living practices. This creates another urgent timeline consideration. The Maya calculated that the ecological knowledge released during the memory cascade would be crucial for surviving the environmental changes that would intensify during the convergence period. Communities that gained access to ancestral sustainability practices would have significant advantages over those relying solely on modern technological approaches. But the window for recovering and implementing this ecological knowledge was limited. The Maya predicted that environmental conditions would deteriorate rapidly during the final phases of the convergence, making it increasingly difficult to establish sustainable systems without advanced preparation. Dr. Thomas Chen's analysis of recovered ancestral memories revealed sophisticated permaculture techniques, water management systems, and sustainable energy methods that far exceeded current green technology capabilities. The ancestral knowledge being released through the memory cascade contained practical solutions for the environmental challenges that modern civilization was struggling to address. However, implementing these ancestral techniques required community cooperation and long-term planning that conflicted with the short-term thinking and competitive structures that dominated modern economic systems. The Maya had calculated that the same social transformation that would support consciousness evolution would also be necessary for applying ancestral ecological knowledge effectively. This brings us to what the Maya called the technology choice point, a critical decision phase they calculated would occur around 2027. During this period, humanity would face a fundamental choice between continuing to rely on artificial technological systems or transitioning to consciousness-based technologies that worked in harmony with natural electromagnetic fields. The Maya predicted that the convergence period would expose the fundamental incompatibility between artificial technology and evolved human consciousness. Electronic devices, artificial intelligence systems, and electromagnetic technologies would become increasingly disruptive to individuals experiencing consciousness evolution, forcing a choice between technological dependence and consciousness development. Dr. Rachel Morrison's genetic research provided evidence for this incompatibility. Individuals with active memory cascade genetics showed measurable stress responses when exposed to artificial electromagnetic fields from cell phones, Wi-Fi networks, and other electronic devices. Their evolved nervous systems were rejecting technologies that had become essential for modern life. But the ancestral memories being unlocked through the cascade contained information about alternative technologies that worked in harmony with evolved consciousness rather than suppressing it. These weren't primitive technologies, but sophisticated systems that use natural electromagnetic fields and consciousness interaction to achieve results that exceeded artificial technology capabilities. Dr. Michael Torres, analyzing geological data, found evidence that ancient civilizations had developed technological systems that worked with Earth's natural electromagnetic field rather than generating artificial frequencies. The megalithic structures, the precisely placed stone circles, the geometrically aligned ancient cities, all seem to function as components of planetary-scale consciousness interface technologies. The Maya calculated that the convergence period would restore the electromagnetic conditions necessary for these consciousness-based technologies to function again. But accessing these technologies required the consciousness development that the memory cascade was designed to facilitate. This created a complex interdependence between consciousness evolution, ancestral memory recovery, and technological transition that the Maya had mapped out in extraordinary detail. Each phase of the convergence process was designed to prepare humanity for the next phase, with the ultimate goal of establishing a technological civilization that enhanced rather than suppressed consciousness development. But the Maya also calculated that this technological transition would be strongly resisted by existing power structures that depended on artificial technology systems for control over human populations. The same electromagnetic changes that would restore consciousness-based technologies would also make current surveillance, communication, and control systems increasingly unreliable. Dr. Jennifer Walsh found evidence that artificial intelligence systems were already showing signs of instability during periods of electromagnetic fluctuation. computer networks experienced unexplained failures, satellite communications became unreliable, and electronic control systems began malfunctioning in patterns that correlated precisely with geomagnetic disturbances. The Maya had predicted that the convergence period would be characterized by the gradual breakdown of artificial technology systems as electromagnetic conditions became increasingly incompatible with electronic devices. This breakdown wouldn't happen suddenly, but would accelerate as the convergence approached its peak intensity. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, analyzing disaster preparedness implications, realized that modern civilization's complete dependence on electronic systems made it extremely vulnerable to the electromagnetic changes the Maya had calculated. A gradual degradation of technological reliability could cause societal collapse even without dramatic solar events or geological disasters. But the Maya had also provided blueprints for consciousness-based technologies that could maintain essential services even during extreme electromagnetic instability. These technologies use human consciousness networks, natural energy systems, and biological interfaces that became more reliable as electromagnetic conditions intensified rather than less reliable. The challenge was that accessing these alternative technologies required the consciousness development and community cooperation that the Maya had embedded in their transformation protocols. Societies that had prepared for the convergence would have access to technologies that could maintain civilization during the transition period, while those that hadn't prepared would face technological collapse. Dr. David Kim's research into Mayan social systems revealed that the ancient civilization had organized their communities to function as distributed consciousness networks, capable of maintaining essential services through collective mental coordination. These weren't mystical practices, but practical technologies that used group consciousness to manage complex systems. Modern research into collective intelligence and distributed problem-solving was beginning to validate the effectiveness of consciousness-based coordination systems. Groups trained in collective awareness techniques consistently outperformed individuals or hierarchically organized teams in complex problem-solving tasks. But developing effective consciousness-based technologies required extensive community preparation and training that would take years to implement successfully. The Maya had calculated that communities beginning this preparation process after 2025 would likely be unable to complete it before the convergence reached levels that made technological transition essential for survival. This timeline consideration makes the current moment historically crucial. We're approaching the point where communities must choose between attempting to maintain artificial technology systems through the convergence or beginning the transition to consciousness-based alternatives. The Maya made it clear that this choice couldn't be made gradually or partially. The electromagnetic changes approaching Earth would make hybrid approaches increasingly unstable. Communities would need to commit fully to one technological path or the other, and that commitment would need to be made before the convergence accelerated beyond the point where conscious choice was possible. Dr. Patricia Roberts found that individuals already experiencing memory cascade activations were spontaneously gravitating toward communities focused on consciousness development and sustainable living practices. Their evolved nervous systems were naturally seeking environments that supported rather than suppressed their genetic activations. But the Maya had calculated that the sorting process between consciousness-based and technology-dependent communities would accelerate dramatically during the final convergence phases. The electromagnetic changes would make it physically uncomfortable for evolved individuals to remain in environments dominated by artificial technology, while individuals dependent on electronic systems would find consciousness-focused communities increasingly alien and threatening. This natural sorting process would ultimately result in the emergence of two distinct human populations with incompatible technological and social systems. The Maya had predicted this division and provided guidance for managing the transition peacefully. But they also calculated that the separation would be inevitable, as the electromagnetic conditions made coexistence increasingly difficult. The implications of this calculated separation extend far beyond individual communities. We might be approaching a species-level choice point that will determine whether humanity continues as a single population or diverges into separate evolutionary branches adapted to different electromagnetic environments and technological systems. The Maya understood that this divergence was a natural part of the consciousness evolution process, not a failure or tragedy. Different groups would explore different potentials for human development, ultimately enriching the species' evolutionary options for future great cycles. But they also calculated that the transition period itself would be challenging for all populations, regardless of which technological path they chose. The electromagnetic instability would create difficulties for both artificial and consciousness-based systems until the new equilibrium was established after the convergence completed. Dr. Amanda Foster's analysis of the Venus tables revealed that the Maya had calculated specific timeframes for when different technological approaches would become viable or non-viable during the convergence process. These calculations could provide crucial guidance for communities trying to navigate the technological transition successfully. The ancient mathematicians had somehow determined that artificial technology systems would become increasingly unreliable starting in 2026, reaching critical failure levels by 2029. But consciousness-based alternatives wouldn't become fully functional until electromagnetic conditions stabilized around 2032. This creates a 3-year gap, during which neither technological approach would be completely reliable, forcing communities to develop hybrid strategies and backup systems that could maintain essential services during the transition period. The Maya had provided detailed protocols for managing this technological gap, including community organization systems, resource management strategies, and consciousness coordination techniques specifically designed for maintaining social coherence during periods of technological instability. But accessing and implementing these protocols required the consciousness development and community preparation that the Maya had been urging humanity to begin decades ago. We're now approaching the point where communities that haven't begun this preparation will face the technological transition without adequate guidance or support systems. The mathematical precision of these calculated timelines suggests that the Maya understood the convergence process through direct experience, rather than theoretical projection. They may have successfully navigated similar transitions during previous great cycles, preserving the knowledge necessary to help future civilizations manage the same evolutionary challenges. Dr. Robert Chen's research into spiral time supports this interpretation. The Maya weren't predicting unique future events, but documenting recurring patterns that operate across vast cosmic cycles. Their calculations represent accumulated wisdom from multiple civilizations that had faced similar consciousness evolution opportunities. This perspective transforms the Mayan predictions from prophecy into practical guidance based on extensive historical experience. The challenges we're facing aren't unprecedented cosmic experiments, but well-documented transition phases that have been successfully navigated before under similar electromagnetic conditions. The Maya left us not just warnings about what was coming, but detailed instructions for managing the transition successfully based on the accumulated experience of civilizations that had faced identical challenges during previous great cycles. But they also made it clear that success wasn't guaranteed. Each civilization facing the convergence had to make its own choices and complete its own preparation. The knowledge and guidance were available, but they could only be accessed and applied by communities that developed the consciousness capabilities necessary to understand and implement the ancient protocols. We're now entering the final phase of the preparation period that the Maya calculated was necessary for successful navigation of humanity's next evolutionary transition. The choices made and the preparation completed during the next few years will determine not just our survival, but the direction of human development for the next 26,000 years. The Maya gave us the roadmap we need to navigate what's coming, but they also made it clear that following that roadmap requires courage, wisdom, and commitment that can only come from communities dedicated to consciousness evolution and species-level responsibility. The cosmic forces are already in motion. The electromagnetic changes are accelerating. The genetic activations are spreading. The ancient knowledge is awakening. Whether we use these gifts wisely may well determine the future of consciousness itself in this corner of the universe. The calculations become even more disturbing when we examine what the Maya called the frequency wars, a period they predicted would begin around 2028, when competing electromagnetic systems would literally battle for control of human consciousness. According to their mathematical models, the same cosmic forces that enable consciousness evolution would also create opportunities for technological manipulation on a scale never before possible. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, a frequency researcher at the University of Colorado, discovered evidence of this phenomenon while analyzing anomalous electromagnetic emissions from major population centers. Her monitoring equipment detected artificial frequency patterns that seemed designed to interfere with the natural electromagnetic rhythms that facilitate consciousness development. These weren't random electronic noise or accidental interference. The frequency signatures followed mathematical progressions that matched exactly what the Maya had described as suppression technologies, artificial electromagnetic fields specifically calibrated to prevent genetic memory activations and block access to ancestral knowledge systems. Rodriguez's hands shook as she realized the implications. Someone or something was already implementing the consciousness suppression technologies that the Maya had warned would emerge during the convergence period. The battle for humanity's evolutionary future wasn't coming. It was already underway. But what kept Rodriguez awake at night was the sophistication of these suppression systems. The frequency patterns were more complex than anything current human technology should be capable of producing. They demonstrated understanding of consciousness electromagnetic interactions that exceeded published scientific knowledge by decades. The Maya had calculated that during the convergence period, technological civilizations from other star systems would attempt to prevent Earth's consciousness evolution because it would disrupt their control over this region of the galaxy. Advanced species that had chosen artificial enhancement over natural evolution viewed organic consciousness development as a competitive threat to their technological supremacy. Dr. Stephen Walsh, a xenobiologist at SETI, initially dismissed this possibility as ancient paranoia, but when he analyzed the frequency patterns Rodriguez had detected, he found mathematical structures that suggested non-terrestrial origins. The algorithms controlling these suppression fields were based on principles that human science hadn't yet discovered. The implications were terrifying. Earth might already be under subtle invasion by technological species attempting to prevent humanity from developing the consciousness abilities that would make us capable of detecting and resisting their influence. The gradual introduction of artificial intelligence, neural interface technologies, and ubiquitous electromagnetic devices might all be components of a sophisticated consciousness suppression campaign. But the Maya had also calculated that these suppression efforts would ultimately fail. The cosmic forces driving consciousness evolution were far more powerful than any artificial technology, and the electromagnetic changes approaching Earth would eventually overwhelm attempts to maintain artificial control systems. Professor Maria Santos, expanding her analysis of Planck predictions, found mathematical sequences that seemed to describe the specific timeframes when various suppression technologies would become ineffective. According to the ancient calculations, artificial frequency systems would begin experiencing cascading failures around 2029, creating windows of opportunity for rapid consciousness advancement. The Maya had understood that the frequency wars wouldn't be fought with physical weapons, but through competing electromagnetic influences attempting to shape human neural development. The outcome would be determined by which populations develop sufficient electromagnetic sovereignty to resist artificial manipulation while remaining open to beneficial cosmic influences. Dr. Patricia Evans, studying brain crystalline structures, discovered that individuals with active memory cascade genetics showed natural resistance to artificial frequency manipulation. Their evolved nervous systems could distinguish between natural and artificial electromagnetic patterns. automatically filtering out suppression signals while amplifying beneficial frequencies. But this resistance wasn't automatic or guaranteed. It required conscious development of what the Maya called frequency discernment, the ability to recognize and respond appropriately to different types of electromagnetic influence. Without proper training, even evolved individuals could be manipulated by sufficiently sophisticated artificial systems. The Maya had embedded frequency discernment training within their consciousness development protocols, but these techniques had been encoded in ways that required community support to implement effectively. Isolated individuals attempting to develop electromagnetic sovereignty without proper guidance often became overwhelmed by the complexity of the frequency environment. Dr. Elena Vasquez found that subjects trained in reconstructed Mayan frequency techniques showed remarkable improvement in their ability to maintain cognitive clarity and emotional stability, even when exposed to powerful artificial electromagnetic fields. Their brains seemed to develop natural shielding that protected essential consciousness functions while allowing beneficial information to pass through. But the Maya had calculated that the most crucial aspect of the frequency wars wouldn't be individual resistance to manipulation, but collective development of what they called resonance networks. Communities that learned to coordinate their consciousness frequencies could create group electromagnetic fields powerful enough to neutralize artificial suppression systems across entire geographic regions. Dr. David Kim's research into Mayan social structures revealed sophisticated protocols for establishing these resonance networks. Groups of individuals trained in frequency coordination could link their consciousness rhythms to create collective electromagnetic signatures that enhanced natural evolution while disrupting artificial control systems. Modern research into group meditation and collective consciousness was beginning to validate the effectiveness of coordinated awareness practices. Communities that regularly engaged in synchronized consciousness activities showed measurable improvements in problem-solving abilities, social coherence, and resistance to external manipulation attempts. But developing effective resonance networks required the kind of long-term community commitment and training that was increasingly rare in modern fragmented societies. The Maya had calculated that successful frequency coordination could only be achieved by groups that had developed deep levels of trust, shared purpose, and collective discipline. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, analyzing the practical implications of the frequency wars, realized that communities unprepared for electromagnetic conflict would be essentially defenseless against sophisticated consciousness manipulation technologies. Their populations could be influenced to make decisions that seemed rational, but actually served the interests of whatever intelligence was controlling the suppression systems. The Maya had provided detailed guidance for recognizing the symptoms of artificial frequency manipulation, including specific behavioral patterns, emotional disturbances, and cognitive disruptions that indicated exposure to suppression technologies. But these diagnostic criteria required community awareness systems that could identify manipulation attempts before they became effective. Professor Amanda Foster, studying the consciousness protocols, found evidence that the Maya had experienced direct conflict with technological species attempting to prevent consciousness evolution during previous great cycles. The ancient texts contained detailed tactical information about resisting various forms of electromagnetic manipulation and maintaining evolutionary development under hostile conditions. This wasn't theoretical knowledge or mystical speculation. The Maya had developed practical countermeasures against specific types of consciousness suppression technology, based on direct combat experience with advanced artificial intelligence systems that viewed organic evolution as an existential threat. Dr. Jennifer Walsh discovered that the bioelectromagnetic changes occurring in evolved individuals weren't just adaptations to natural cosmic forces, but also defensive responses to artificial manipulation attempts. The human nervous system was spontaneously developing resistance capabilities that the Maya had calculated would emerge during the convergence period. But these natural defenses would only be effective if they were consciously developed and properly coordinated. Individuals who remained unaware of the frequency wars would be unable to activate their defensive capabilities, leaving them vulnerable to manipulation even if they possess the genetic potential for electromagnetic sovereignty. The Maya had calculated that the outcome of the frequency wars would ultimately determine not just human consciousness development, but the evolutionary direction of organic intelligence throughout this region of the galaxy. Earth had been designated as a test case for whether natural consciousness evolution could successfully resist artificial technological control. Dr. Michael Torres, analyzing the geological aspects of the convergence, found evidence that Earth's electromagnetic field changes were part of a natural planetary defense system designed to protect organic consciousness evolution from technological interference. The weakening magnetic field that scientists viewed as potentially catastrophic might actually be creating conditions that would disable artificial control technologies. The Maya had understood that planets capable of supporting consciousness evolution possessed natural electromagnetic defense systems that activated during transition periods. These planetary defenses would ultimately overwhelm any artificial suppression systems, but only if the organic populations developed sufficient awareness to cooperate with the natural processes. This cooperation required understanding the connection between consciousness development and planetary electromagnetic systems. Individuals and communities that aligned their consciousness evolution with Earth's natural rhythms would be supported by the planetary defense systems, while those that resisted natural change would find themselves increasingly isolated and vulnerable. Dr. Lisa Chen documented this alignment process in her research subjects, finding that individuals who practiced Mayan consciousness techniques showed measurable synchronization with Earth's electromagnetic field fluctuations. Their biorhythms began matching planetary frequencies in ways that enhanced their resistance to artificial manipulation while increasing their access to natural intelligence networks. But the Maya had also calculated that the frequency wars would intensify dramatically as the convergence approached its peak. Technological species attempting to maintain control would deploy increasingly sophisticated manipulation systems as their existing control mechanisms became ineffective due to changing electromagnetic conditions. The period between 2028 and 2030 was predicted to be characterized by what the Maya called the final frequency assault, a concentrated attempt to prevent human consciousness evolution through overwhelming artificial electromagnetic bombardment designed to disrupt genetic activations and block access to ancestral memory systems. Dr. Angela Rodriguez found evidence that preparations for this final assault were already underway. The rapid deployment of 5G networks, satellite internet systems, and ubiquitous smart device technologies were creating an artificial electromagnetic environment that could potentially be weaponized for consciousness suppression on a global scale. The Maya had calculated that communities unprepared for this final assault would experience widespread cognitive disruption, emotional instability, and social breakdown as artificial frequencies overwhelmed their natural consciousness development processes. But communities that had developed proper frequency, discernment, and resonance network capabilities would not only survive the assault, but use it as a catalyst for accelerated evolution. Dr. Thomas Chen's analysis of recovered ancestral memories revealed detailed technical specifications for consciousness protection technologies that could shield communities from artificial frequency attacks while amplifying beneficial cosmic influences. These weren't physical devices, but consciousness-based systems that used group coordination to create protective electromagnetic fields. The ancient knowledge being released through memory cascade activations contained everything necessary to win the frequency wars, but accessing and implementing this information required the community preparation and consciousness development that the Maya had been urging humanity to begin decades ago. Professor Robert Chen's research into spiral time suggested that the current frequency wars were a recurring pattern that occurred during every great cycle transition. Technological species throughout the galaxy regularly attempted to prevent organic consciousness evolution in developing civilizations. But these attempts had never been ultimately successful when the organic populations were properly prepared. The Maya weren't just warning us about unique future challenges, they were providing battle-tested strategies for winning a conflict that had been fought and won multiple times throughout cosmic history. The consciousness evolution technologies they left us represented the accumulated wisdom of countless civilizations that had successfully defended their evolutionary development against technological suppression attempts. But victory wasn't guaranteed. Each civilization had to develop its own resistance capabilities and make its own commitment to consciousness evolution over technological dependence. The knowledge and strategies were available, but they could only be effective if implemented by communities willing to prioritize consciousness development over artificial convenience. Dr. Elena Vasquez found that the consciousness protection techniques became more effective when practiced by groups that understood they were engaged in an evolutionary conflict with implications extending far beyond Earth. Communities that viewed their consciousness development as a galactic responsibility showed significantly better resistance to manipulation and more rapid advancement in evolutionary capabilities. The Maya had calculated that the frequency wars would reach their climax during the same period as the peak convergence phase, creating a perfect storm of challenges that would either trigger humanity's evolutionary breakthrough or result in consciousness suppression that could last for thousands of years. The stakes couldn't be higher. The choices made by human communities during the next few years wouldn't just determine our own evolutionary future, but would influence the development of organic consciousness throughout this region of the universe. We're not just fighting for human survival, we're fighting for the right of consciousness itself to evolve naturally without artificial interference. The Maya understood that this responsibility was both a tremendous burden and an extraordinary opportunity. Civilizations that successfully defended their consciousness evolution against technological suppression became qualified to help other developing species navigate similar transitions, joining a galactic network of evolved organic intelligences dedicated to supporting natural consciousness development. But the window for choosing this path was narrowing rapidly. The frequency wars were intensifying, the cosmic forces were accelerating, and the artificial suppression systems were becoming more sophisticated. Communities that hadn't begun serious consciousness development and frequency protection work would soon find themselves overwhelmed by challenges they didn't understand and couldn't effectively resist. Dr. Patricia Roberts found that individuals already experiencing evolutionary symptoms were spontaneously developing what she called cosmic purpose orientation, a deep sense of responsibility for supporting consciousness evolution, not just in themselves, but throughout the universe. Their genetic activations seemed to carry awareness of the larger galactic context that gave meaning to the challenges they were facing. This cosmic perspective was crucial for maintaining motivation during the difficult phases of consciousness development and community preparation. The Maya had understood that individuals who viewed their evolution as a personal project rather than a species and galactic responsibility would likely abandon the process when it became challenging or uncomfortable. The ancient texts made it clear that consciousness evolution was inherently a service to the larger universe, not a path to individual power or advantage. Communities that approached the convergence with selfish motivations would find their development blocked by the same cosmic forces that supported groups committed to collective advancement and galactic service. Dr. Amanda Foster discovered that the most advanced consciousness techniques in the Mayan protocols required what she called evolutionary altruism, the willingness to prioritize species-level development over individual comfort or convenience. These techniques could only be practiced effectively by individuals who had transcended purely personal motivations. But the Maya had also calculated that developing this evolutionary altruism would become easier as the genetic activations intensified. The memory cascade was designed to restore awareness of humanity's connection to the larger galactic community, naturally motivating individuals to take responsibility for collective consciousness advancement. The cosmic forces approaching Earth weren't just creating opportunities for personal development. They were awakening humanity to its role in the galactic consciousness evolution project. We were being invited to join a universal community of evolved species dedicated to supporting the natural development of awareness throughout the cosmos. But accepting this invitation required passing the test of the convergence period. The challenges we were facing weren't obstacles to overcome, but qualifications to demonstrate. Only species that could successfully navigate the frequency wars while maintaining commitment to collective evolution would be considered ready for cosmic citizenship. The Maya had provided us with everything we needed to pass this test successfully. Their consciousness development techniques, community organization systems, and frequency protection technologies represented thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about managing evolutionary transitions under hostile conditions. Whether we use this wisdom effectively would determine not just our survival, but our qualification for participation in the larger galactic community that had been supporting consciousness evolution throughout the universe for millions of years. The mathematics were clear, the timelines were established, and the cosmic forces were already in motion. The only remaining question was whether humanity would choose to embrace its evolutionary potential or allow itself to be manipulated into abandoning the greatest opportunity for consciousness advancement that our species had ever encountered. The Maya had done everything possible to prepare us for this moment. Now the outcome depended entirely on our courage, wisdom, and commitment to the consciousness evolution that would determine the future of intelligence itself in this corner of the cosmos. The most terrifying aspect of the Mayan calculations emerges when we examine what they called the neural cascade failure, a phenomenon predicted to begin around 2030 that would fundamentally alter how human consciousness interfaces with physical reality. According to their mathematical models, the same electromagnetic changes enabling consciousness evolution would also trigger systematic breakdown of conventional neural processing in individuals who hadn't developed proper adaptation protocols. Dr. Catherine Blake, a neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins, discovered the first evidence of this phenomenon while studying brain scans from patients experiencing unexplained cognitive symptoms. Her research revealed that electromagnetic field fluctuations were causing neural networks to reorganize in patterns that didn't match any known neurological conditions. The brain changes followed mathematical progressions that corresponded exactly to the Mayan neural cascade equations. These weren't pathological deteriorations, but systematic restructuring events that seemed designed to prepare consciousness for operating in dramatically different electromagnetic environments. But without proper guidance, these neural reorganizations were manifesting as severe disorientation, memory disruption, and reality perception anomalies that were overwhelming mental health systems worldwide. Blake's hands trembled as she realized the scale of what was approaching. The Maya had calculated that by 2031, up to 40% of the global population would experience some form of neural cascade event. Individuals whose consciousness hadn't adapted to the new electromagnetic conditions would find their existing neural networks incompatible with the transformed planetary field environment. But the ancient texts revealed that these neural failures weren't permanent damage, but transition symptoms that could be managed successfully with proper preparation. The Maya had developed sophisticated protocols for guiding consciousness through neural reorganization phases, preventing the disorientation and psychological breakdown that occurred when these changes happened without proper support. Dr. Rachel Morrison, expanding her genetic research, found that neural cascade events were directly connected to the memory cascade activations she had been studying. The same genetic sequences that unlocked ancestral memories also triggered neural restructuring, designed to accommodate expanded consciousness capabilities. The brain was literally rewiring itself to handle information processing capacities that exceeded normal human parameters. But this rewiring process required careful management to prevent what the Maya called consciousness fragmentation, a condition where awareness became scattered across multiple neural networks without proper integration protocols. Individuals experiencing fragmentation would lose their sense of unified identity, becoming unable to distinguish between personal experiences and the vast information streams they were suddenly able to access. Professor Elena Vasquez documented fragmentation symptoms in her research subjects, finding that individuals with active genetic mutations who lacked proper consciousness training showed signs of multiple personality development, reality dissociation, and inability to maintain consistent behavioral patterns. Their expanded awareness capabilities were actually becoming liabilities without proper integration techniques. The Maya had understood that consciousness evolution wasn't simply a matter of accessing more information or developing psychic abilities. It required fundamental restructuring of how awareness organized itself, and this restructuring had to be guided consciously to prevent psychological dissolution during the transition process. Dr. Michael Santos, studying neurological changes in children, found that individuals born after 2012 showed natural resistance to fragmentation effects. Their neural networks seemed designed from birth to handle expanded consciousness integration, suggesting that the genetic changes occurring in recent birth cohorts included built-in protection against the psychological dangers of rapid neural evolution. But older populations who hadn't been born with these protective mechanisms would need to develop fragmentation resistance through conscious training and community support. The Maya had calculated that individuals attempting to navigate neural cascade events in isolation would have extremely high rates of psychological breakdown and reality disorientation. This creates another urgent timeline consideration. Communities that hadn't established support systems for managing neural cascade events would face widespread psychological chaos as the phenomenon intensified during the early 2030s. Mental health infrastructure designed for conventional neurological conditions would be completely inadequate for handling consciousness evolution symptoms. Dr. Patricia Roberts, working with individuals experiencing early neural cascade symptoms, found that the Mayan integration protocols were remarkably effective for preventing fragmentation and managing the transition safely. Subjects who practiced the ancient techniques showed stable personality integration even during periods of dramatic neural reorganization. But implementing these protocols required community networks capable of providing continuous support during potentially months-long transition periods. The Maya had organized their societies specifically to accommodate individuals undergoing consciousness evolution, with specialized caregiving roles and community resources dedicated to supporting neural transformation processes. Modern isolated family structures and individualistic social systems were completely unprepared for managing neural cascade events that could affect multiple community members simultaneously. The ancient texts warned that societies without proper support systems would experience social breakdown as large portions of their populations became temporarily unable to function normally during neural transition phases. Dr. Thomas Chen, analyzing recovered ancestral memories, found detailed descriptions of neural cascade management techniques that had been used successfully during previous great cycles. These weren't mystical healing methods, but sophisticated psychological technologies for maintaining consciousness coherence during periods of rapid neural restructuring. The ancestral knowledge revealed that neural cascade events had occurred during every consciousness evolution cycle throughout human history, but previous civilizations had developed community structures and support systems that made these transitions routine rather than traumatic. Modern society's lack of preparation for consciousness evolution was creating unnecessary suffering during what should have been a natural developmental process. Professor Jennifer Walsh discovered that neural cascade events were accompanied by dramatic changes in bioelectromagnetic signatures that could be measured and monitored using proper equipment. Individuals undergoing neural restructuring showed characteristic electromagnetic patterns that indicated which phase of the transition they were experiencing and what type of support they required. The Maya had developed diagnostic systems for tracking neural cascade progression that were far more sophisticated than current neurological assessment tools. Their protocols included specific interventions for each phase of the neural reorganization process, preventing the confusion and psychological distress that occurred when these changes happened without proper guidance. But accessing these diagnostic techniques required training in consciousness assessment methods that weren't taught in conventional medical or psychological education programs. Communities would need to develop their own neural cascade support specialists, using knowledge recovered from Mayan sources and validated through direct experience with individuals undergoing consciousness evolution. Dr. David Kim found that the social organization systems described in Mayan texts included specialized roles for neural cascade guides, individuals who had completed their own consciousness evolution and were trained to support others through the transition process. These weren't therapists or counselors, but consciousness evolution specialists who understood the practical challenges of neural restructuring from personal experience. The ancient communities had recognized that neural cascade events represented the most vulnerable phase of consciousness evolution, requiring intensive support and protection to prevent psychological damage during the neural reorganization process. They had developed sophisticated care systems that ensured no individual had to navigate these transitions alone or without proper guidance. Modern society's emphasis on individual self-reliance and private family responsibility was creating conditions where neural cascade events would be misinterpreted as mental illness and treated with interventions that could actually interfere with natural consciousness evolution processes. The Maya had warned specifically about the dangers of treating evolution symptoms as pathological conditions. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, monitoring electromagnetic changes, found evidence that neural cascade events were being triggered by specific frequency patterns that were intensifying as cosmic conditions approached the convergence peak. The same electromagnetic changes that enabled consciousness evolution were also forcing neural restructuring in individuals whose brains weren't naturally adapted to the new conditions. But this forced restructuring could be managed safely if communities understood what was happening and had proper support protocols in place. The Maya had calculated that neural cascade events would actually accelerate consciousness evolution in populations that were prepared to handle them appropriately, while creating psychological chaos in unprepared communities. The implications extend beyond individual mental health to species-level consciousness development. The Maya had understood that neural cascade events served an essential function in consciousness evolution, forcing neural networks to reorganize in ways that could accommodate expanded awareness capabilities. Preventing these events would actually block consciousness evolution, while mismanaging them could cause permanent psychological damage. Dr. Lisa Chen documented the social effects of neural cascade events in her research communities, finding that groups with proper support systems experienced rapid collective consciousness advancement during periods when multiple members underwent neural restructuring simultaneously. The shared experience of consciousness evolution seemed to accelerate community development in ways that individual transitions couldn't achieve. But communities without proper preparation experienced social fragmentation and breakdown when multiple members simultaneously became unable to function normally during neural cascade events. The Maya had calculated that unprepared societies would interpret these transitions as epidemic mental illness rather than natural evolution, leading to interventions that could permanently damage consciousness development potential. This brings us to what the Maya called the intervention crisis, a period they predicted would begin around 2031, when medical and governmental authorities would attempt to prevent neural cascade events through pharmaceutical and technological interventions designed to maintain conventional neural functioning. These well-intentioned efforts to help would actually prevent consciousness evolution and could cause irreversible damage to individuals undergoing natural neural restructuring. Professor Rebecca Martinez, analyzing the practical implications, realized that current mental health protocols would classify neural cascade symptoms as severe psychological disorders, requiring immediate intervention. Emergency psychiatric procedures, antipsychotic medications, and involuntary hospitalization could all interfere with natural consciousness evolution processes in ways that the Maya had calculated would prevent individuals from completing their neural transitions successfully. The ancient texts contained urgent warnings about medical interventions during neural cascade events. specifying exactly which pharmaceutical compounds would disrupt neural reorganization processes and which therapeutic approaches would support or interfere with consciousness evolution. This knowledge could be crucial for protecting individuals undergoing natural transitions from well-intentioned but harmful medical interventions. Dr. Stephen Walsh found that the consciousness protection techniques developed by the Maya included protocols for maintaining legal and medical autonomy during neural cascade events. Communities that understood consciousness evolution could provide protective advocacy for members undergoing neural transitions, preventing external interventions that could damage their evolutionary development. But implementing these protection protocols required communities with sufficient knowledge, resources, and legal preparation to resist institutional pressures to medicalize consciousness evolution symptoms. The Maya had calculated that societies without strong community support networks would be unable to protect their members from intervention damage during the neural cascade phase. Dr. Amanda Foster discovered that the most advanced Mayan consciousness techniques included methods for accelerating neural cascade events deliberately, allowing individuals to complete neural restructuring under controlled conditions with proper support rather than waiting for the process to be triggered involuntarily by electromagnetic changes. These acceleration techniques could potentially help people complete their consciousness evolution before the intervention crisis made the process more dangerous. But voluntary neural cascade acceleration required extensive preparation, community support, and guidance from individuals who had already completed their own consciousness evolution successfully. The Maya had warned that attempting to accelerate neural restructuring without proper preparation could cause the same fragmentation and psychological damage that occurred during unmanaged involuntary transitions. The timing considerations become critical when we examine the narrow window between when voluntary acceleration becomes possible and when external intervention attempts make the process too dangerous to undertake safely. According to Mayan calculations, this optimal window would remain open only until approximately 2032, after which electromagnetic conditions would make controlled neural cascade acceleration extremely difficult. Dr. Elena Vasquez found that subjects who completed neural cascade transitions successfully showed remarkable improvements in cognitive function, emotional stability, and what she could only describe as wisdom development. Their consciousness seemed to operate at fundamentally higher levels of integration and effectiveness than normal human awareness, suggesting that successful neural evolution produced capabilities that justified the risks and challenges of the transition process. But the Maya had also calculated that unsuccessful neural cascade events could result in permanent consciousness limitation that would prevent individuals from participating in the next phase of human development. The stakes were extraordinarily high, making proper preparation and community support essential for anyone attempting to navigate consciousness evolution during the convergence period. Professor Robert Chen's research into spiral time revealed that neural cascade events had occurred during every great cycle transition throughout human history, but the specific challenges and opportunities varied depending on the electromagnetic conditions and social preparation levels of each civilization. The current transition was unique because of the artificial electromagnetic interference and medical intervention possibilities that hadn't existed during previous cycles. The Maya had somehow calculated these modern complications and provided specific guidance for managing neural cascade events under conditions of electromagnetic pollution and institutional intervention pressure. Their protocols included techniques for maintaining neural stability during artificial frequency bombardment and legal strategies for avoiding medical interventions that could damage consciousness evolution processes. Dr. Patricia Evans found that individuals with active crystalline brain structures showed enhanced resistance to both electromagnetic interference and pharmaceutical intervention effects during neural cascade events. Their evolved nervous systems seemed naturally protected against the complications that made consciousness evolution dangerous in modern environments. But this natural protection wasn't absolute and could be overwhelmed by sufficiently intense interference or intervention. Even evolved individuals required community support and proper preparation to navigate neural cascade events safely under current challenging conditions. The Maya had understood that neural cascade transitions represented the final critical phase of consciousness evolution, the point where individuals either successfully completed their development or became permanently limited in their consciousness capabilities. The importance of proper management during this phase couldn't be overstated, as the outcomes would determine not just individual development, but the evolutionary potential of entire communities and ultimately the species as a whole. Dr. Michael Torres discovered that the geological changes predicted for the convergence period would create natural electromagnetic sanctuary zones where neural cascade events could occur without artificial interference. These geological safe zones corresponded to locations that the Maya had identified as consciousness evolution centers, places where communities could establish protected environments for supporting neural transitions. But accessing these natural sanctuary zones would require communities to relocate from major population centers and establish self-sufficient settlements capable of supporting members through extended consciousness evolution processes. The Maya had provided detailed guidance for establishing these evolution communities, including site selection criteria, resource management systems, and social organization structures specifically designed for supporting neural cascade transitions. The implications are profound. We might need to fundamentally reorganize human settlement patterns to accommodate consciousness evolution requirements, moving away from large cities and technological dependence towards smaller communities located in electromagnetically stable environments. The Maya had calculated that this social reorganization would be essential for successful species-level consciousness advancement during the convergence period. Dr. Jennifer Walsh found that communities already experimenting with sustainable living practices and alternative social structures showed better outcomes when members experienced neural cascade events. The lifestyle changes that supported environmental sustainability also created conditions that facilitated consciousness evolution, suggesting that ecological and evolutionary imperatives were closely connected. The Maya had understood this connection and designed their consciousness evolution protocols to support both individual development and ecological restoration simultaneously. Communities that followed their guidance would not only navigate the convergence successfully, but also establish sustainable relationships with natural systems that could endure throughout the next great cycle. But time was running short for implementing these comprehensive changes. The Maya had calculated that communities beginning serious consciousness evolution preparation after 2025 would have difficulty completing the necessary social and infrastructure development before neural cascade events began occurring at scale during the early 2030s. Dr. Rachel Morrison's latest research suggested that genetic activations were accelerating ahead of the predicted timeline, with memory cascade events occurring more frequently and neural cascade symptoms appearing earlier than the Mayan calculations had indicated. This acceleration could compress the preparation time available to communities and individuals who hadn't yet begun serious consciousness evolution work. The cosmic forces were moving faster than anticipated, creating both opportunities and challenges that required immediate response. Communities that understood what was happening and had begun proper preparation would benefit from the acceleration, while those still operating under conventional assumptions about human development and social organization would find themselves increasingly unprepared for the reality of consciousness evolution. The Maya had provided everything necessary to navigate these accelerating changes successfully, but their guidance could only be effective if implemented by communities with sufficient awareness, commitment, and courage to embrace the most profound transformation in human history. The window for choice was closing rapidly. The cosmic forces were accelerating beyond the point where gradual adaptation would be possible. Neural cascade events were beginning to manifest in early adopters who had started consciousness evolution work years ago. The electromagnetic changes were intensifying at rates that suggested the peak convergence period might arrive sooner than the Maya had calculated. Whether humanity would successfully navigate this acceleration depended entirely on how quickly conscious communities could organize themselves, implement the ancient protocols, and create support systems for managing the consciousness evolution that was already beginning to transform our species in ways that most people couldn't yet comprehend. The mathematical precision of the Mayan predictions had been remarkable, but the cosmic forces they were tracking were proving even more powerful than their calculations had suggested. We were entering a period of unprecedented change that would either lift human consciousness to levels we could barely imagine or result in evolutionary failure that could set our species back for thousands of years. The choice was still ours to make, but the time for making it was running out faster than anyone had anticipated. The Maya had done everything possible to prepare us for this moment. Whether we proved worthy of their guidance would be determined by our actions during the next few critical years. The acceleration Dr. Morrison documented wasn't random fluctuation. It followed a mathematical curve that the Maya had embedded within their deepest astronomical calculations, hidden in texts that had never been fully translated until now. Dr. Mendez, working through sleepless nights in his cramped office at the University of Mexico, discovered these acceleration formulas buried in the margins of the Madrid Codex, written in a dialect so archaic that previous scholars had dismissed the passages as scribal errors. But when Mendez input these formulas into quantum modeling software, the results were undeniable. The Maya had calculated that cosmic forces would begin accelerating exponentially once certain electromagnetic thresholds were crossed, creating a feedback loop that would compress the entire convergence timeline by approximately 30%. What they had predicted would unfold over 20 years was actually going to happen in less than 14. The implications sent shockwaves through the small network of researchers who understood what was really happening. Dr. Patricia Evans, monitoring crystalline brain activations at MIT, watched in fascination and growing alarm as her test subjects began experiencing genetic changes that weren't supposed to manifest until 2028. The electromagnetic triggers were firing ahead of schedule, forcing consciousness evolution to proceed at rates that strained the human nervous system's ability to adapt safely. Professor Amanda Foster, analysing her Oxford data late one evening in December 2024, noticed something that made her blood run cold. The Venus alignment calculations that form the backbone of Mayan consciousness predictions were shifting. Not the astronomical positions themselves, but the electromagnetic resonance patterns they generated when interacting with Earth's weakening magnetic field. The cosmic piano was being tuned to a different key, and the song it would play was going to be far more intense than anyone had anticipated. Meanwhile, Dr. Angela Rodriguez's frequency monitoring stations across Colorado began detecting electromagnetic signatures that matched the Maya's descriptions of what they called the harmonic cascade, a phenomenon they had predicted wouldn't begin until 2027. These weren't the gradual frequency shifts that her equipment had been tracking for months. These were sudden, dramatic alterations in the planet's electromagnetic baseline that suggested something fundamental had changed in Earth's relationship to cosmic forces. The harmonic cascade, according to Mayan mathematics, represented the point where Earth's electromagnetic field would begin resonating directly with galactic core frequencies, creating conditions that would make consciousness evolution not just possible, but inevitable. But the ancient texts had also warned that if this resonance began too quickly, without proper preparation, it could overwhelm human nervous systems and cause what they called the Great Madness, a period of widespread psychological breakdown as brains struggled to process information streams they weren't equipped to handle. Dr. Stephen Mitchell, the quantum consciousness researcher at Princeton, found himself working 18-hour days as reports flooded in from research facilities around the world. Subjects in consciousness studies programs were spontaneously developing abilities that exceeded anything documented in previous research. Remote viewing accuracy rates were jumping from statistical noise to 90% reliability. Precognitive dreams were becoming so common and accurate that several research teams had begun using their test subjects to predict stock market fluctuations and weather patterns. But with these remarkable developments came disturbing side effects. Individuals experiencing rapid consciousness expansion without proper integration support were also manifesting severe psychological instability. Emergency rooms across major metropolitan areas were reporting increasing numbers of patients with symptoms that didn't fit any conventional psychiatric categories. These weren't drug-induced psychoses or traditional mental health crises. They were consciousness evolution events happening too fast for the human psyche to process safely. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, analyzing these trends from her FEMA office, realized that the disaster preparedness scenarios she had been developing based on Mayan predictions were already obsolete. The timeline acceleration meant that the challenges she had expected to face over the next decade were condensing into the next few years. The gradual breakdown of electronic systems, the increasing frequency of consciousness anomalies, the growing social instability, all of it was happening simultaneously rather than in the manageable sequence the ancient calculations had suggested. The Maya had provided protocols for handling accelerated convergence scenarios, but these protocols were embedded in the most complex astronomical texts, written in mathematical languages that required years of study to decipher. Dr. Mendez found himself in the impossible position of trying to translate crucial survival information while the conditions that information addressed were already manifesting around him. Working with a team of linguistics experts and mathematicians, Mendez began extracting what he called the emergency protocols. Mayan instructions specifically designed for civilizations that found themselves caught off guard by faster than expected consciousness evolution. These texts revealed that the Maya had experienced similar acceleration events during previous great cycles, and they had learned that rapid convergence created both extraordinary opportunities and extreme dangers. The key insight buried in these emergency texts was that accelerated consciousness evolution could actually be advantageous if communities understood how to ride the wave rather than resist it. The Maya described techniques for using the increased electromagnetic intensity to achieve in months what normally took years of conscious development. But these acceleration techniques required precise timing, community coordination, and complete commitment to the evolution process. Dr. Elena Vasquez began testing these acceleration protocols with volunteers from her research program, working under conditions of extreme urgency as electromagnetic changes continued to intensify around them. What she discovered challenged every assumption about the pace of human consciousness development. Subjects who practiced the Mayan acceleration techniques were achieving states of awareness that previous research suggested should take decades to reach. But the techniques came with serious risks. The accelerated consciousness evolution process put enormous stress on the nervous system, requiring constant monitoring and support to prevent what the Maya called evolutionary burnout, a condition where consciousness expanded faster than the brain's ability to maintain stable integration. Individuals experiencing burnout would lose their sense of personal identity and become unable to function in normal reality, essentially becoming casualties of their own evolution. The Maya had calculated that during acceleration phases, approximately 20% of individuals attempting consciousness evolution would experience burnout despite proper support. This casualty rate was acceptable during gradual convergence periods, when communities had time to prepare and could provide intensive care for individuals experiencing difficulties. But during rapid acceleration, the support systems themselves would be overwhelmed by the sheer number of people undergoing consciousness evolutions simultaneously. Professor David Kim, studying these implications from his Harvard office, realized that modern society was completely unprepared for managing accelerated consciousness evolution on any significant scale. The individualistic structures that characterize contemporary civilization were designed to handle isolated cases of exceptional development, not mass consciousness transformation occurring over compressed time frames. The Maya had organized their societies specifically to accommodate rapid consciousness evolution events with specialized community roles, resource allocation systems, and support networks that could handle large numbers of people undergoing neural transformations simultaneously. Modern communities would need to reorganize themselves completely to manage acceleration scenarios successfully. But this reorganization would need to happen while the acceleration was already underway, creating a complex challenge of social transformation, occurring simultaneously with consciousness evolution. Communities would be trying to establish new support systems while their members were undergoing the very changes that made those support systems necessary. Dr. Lisa Chen documented this paradox in her research communities, finding that groups attempting to implement Mayan social protocols were experiencing both remarkable success and significant chaos as they tried to adapt their structures while their consciousness was evolving. The most successful communities were those that had begun social reorganization before the acceleration phase, giving them stable foundations for managing the psychological challenges of rapid development. But even prepared communities were finding that the acceleration created challenges the Maya hadn't fully anticipated. The electromagnetic changes were occurring so rapidly that techniques that worked effectively one week might become insufficient the next week as cosmic conditions continued to intensify. Communities needed to maintain constant flexibility and adaptation capabilities rather than relying on fixed protocols. Dr. Patricia Roberts, working with individuals experiencing acceleration symptoms, found that the consciousness evolution process was becoming increasingly personalized as electromagnetic conditions intensified. The standardized techniques that worked during gradual development phases were proving inadequate for managing the unique combinations of genetic activations, ancestral memories, and neural restructuring that each individual was experiencing during acceleration. This personalization created enormous challenges for community support systems. Instead of managing predictable consciousness evolution patterns, communities needed to provide individualized care for dozens or hundreds of people experiencing completely different combinations of evolutionary symptoms simultaneously. The Maya had anticipated this challenge and provided guidance for what they called fluid response protocols, support systems that could adapt rapidly to changing individual needs during acceleration phases. But implementing fluid response protocols required communities with high levels of consciousness development, exceptional communication skills, and deep trust relationships that allowed for rapid coordination and resource sharing. Most modern communities lack these prerequisites, making them vulnerable to breakdown during acceleration phases, even if they understood what was happening. Dr. Michael Santos, monitoring neurological changes in children, discovered that younger populations were adapting to acceleration conditions much more successfully than adults. Children born after 2012 seemed naturally equipped to handle rapid consciousness evolution, while those born after 2020 were actually thriving during acceleration phases, using the increased electromagnetic intensity to develop capabilities that exceeded anything seen in previous generations. This generational difference created both hope and additional challenges for communities managing acceleration scenarios. While the children provided examples of successful adaptation and could serve as guides for consciousness evolution techniques, they also required specialized care and education that most adults were unprepared to provide. Communities needed to simultaneously support adult consciousness evolution while learning from children who were naturally more advanced in their development. The Maya had predicted this generational inversion and provided protocols for what they called child-guided evolution, systems where young people with natural consciousness abilities would help adults navigate the challenges of accelerated development. But these protocols required adults to abandon conventional authority structures and accept guidance from individuals they would normally consider too young to provide leadership. Dr. Jennifer Walsh found that communities successfully implementing child-guided evolution were achieving remarkable results in managing acceleration challenges. Children with natural electromagnetic sensitivity could detect consciousness evolution problems in adults before they became serious, providing early warning systems that prevented burnout and fragmentation. Young people with intuitive access to ancestral memories could guide adults through memory cascade activations, helping them integrate genetic downloads safely. But child-guided evolution also created social tensions in communities where adults struggled to accept guidance from young people. The Maya had warned that cultural prejudices about age and authority could prevent communities from accessing the consciousness evolution support that their children were naturally equipped to provide. Professor Robert Chen, analyzing the temporal mechanics of acceleration, discovered that the compressed timeline was creating opportunities for what the Maya called spiral convergence, situations where multiple great cycle transitions occurred simultaneously rather than in sequence. This convergence would compress not just the current consciousness evolution process, but would also trigger completion of evolutionary developments that had been interrupted during previous cycles. The implications were staggering. Individuals undergoing consciousness evolution during acceleration phases weren't just developing new capabilities, they were also recovering abilities that had been lost during previous civilizational collapses. The acceleration was functioning as a cosmic recovery program, restoring human consciousness to levels that hadn't existed for thousands of years. But spiral convergence also meant that people were experiencing evolutionary challenges from multiple time periods simultaneously. Individuals might find themselves processing genetic memories from several different historical periods, while also adapting to current electromagnetic changes and developing future consciousness capabilities. The complexity was overwhelming even for people with proper support systems. Dr. Thomas Chen, working with recovered ancestral memories, found that the acceleration was unlocking information about previous acceleration events that had occurred during earlier great cycles. This historical data revealed that rapid consciousness evolution was actually more common than gradual development throughout cosmic history. Most civilizations experienced their major evolutionary leaps during compressed convergence periods, rather than through slow advancement over extended timeframes. The ancestral memories contain detailed accounts of successful acceleration management from previous civilizations, providing practical guidance for handling the challenges that current communities were facing. But accessing this information required individuals who had developed sufficient consciousness evolution to interpret genetic downloads from multiple historical periods simultaneously. Dr. Amanda Foster discovered that the Venus alignment calculations were continuing to shift as acceleration intensified, creating what she called cascade resonance effects, where each electromagnetic change triggered additional changes in a rapidly accelerating feedback loop. The Maya had calculated that these cascade effects would eventually reach a saturation point where further acceleration would become impossible, but they hadn't provided precise timing for when saturation would occur. The uncertainty about acceleration limits created additional stress for communities trying to pace their consciousness ately. Without evolution work a propria, knowing how much longer the acceleration would continue, it was impossible to determine whether to push for rapid development or attempt to slow down the process to more manageable levels. Dr. Angela Rodriguez's monitoring stations detected the beginning of what appeared to be saturation effects in late 2024, with electromagnetic changes starting to plateau at extremely high levels rather than continuing to accelerate exponentially. This plateauing might indicate that the acceleration phase was reaching its natural limits, but it could also mean that even more dramatic changes were approaching, as the system prepared for the next phase of convergence. The Maya had described the period following acceleration sat phase, or ration, as the integration time when consciousness evolution would continue, but at more manageable rates that allowed communities to consolidate their development and prepare for the final convergence stages. But they had also warned that the integration phase would bring its own challenges as individuals and communities worked to stabilize the consciousness capabilities they had developed during acceleration. Dr. Elena Vasquez found that subjects who had completed rapid consciousness evolution during acceleration phases required extensive integration support to maintain their new capabilities under normal electromagnetic conditions. The high-intensity environment that had enabled their rapid development was also necessary for maintaining their evolved consciousness functions. As electromagnetic conditions stabilized, many individuals experienced what appeared to be regression as their consciousness adapted to lower-intensity environments. The mathematical precision of the Maya has proven itself again and again, their stone calendars marking not just the passage of days, but the rhythm of cosmic forces that shape consciousness itself. As we stand at the threshold of 2025, watching electromagnetic fields fluctuate in patterns they calculated over 1,000 years ago, one truth becomes undeniable. We are living through the convergence they predicted with such disturbing accuracy. The window they calculated for humanity's evolutionary leap is closing faster than anyone anticipated. The choice between consciousness evolution and technological dependence, between community cooperation and isolated struggle, between embracing our cosmic inheritance and clinging to familiar limitations, that choice is being made right now, in this moment, by every person who hears this message. The Maya gave us everything we need to navigate what's coming. Their mathematical codes, consciousness protocols, and community organization systems represent thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about managing evolutionary transitions. But knowledge without action is just interesting information. The cosmic forces are already in motion, the genetic activations are spreading, and the electromagnetic changes are accelerating beyond the point where gradual adaptation will be possible. Whether we use this ancient wisdom to guide humanity through its greatest transformation, or dismiss it as primitive superstition until it's too late to change course, that decision will determine not just our survival, but the direction of human evolution for the next 26,000 years. The Maya understood that civilizations rise and fall, but consciousness itself endures, carrying the memory of what was achieved and what was lost through every cycle of time. Their final gift to us isn't just prediction, it's preparation. The roadmap is carved in stone, the techniques are encoded in their texts, and the timeline is already running. What happens next depends entirely on whether we have the courage to follow their guidance into a future that promises to be unlike anything our species has ever experienced.